Hello and welcome to the fifth episode of the Arkane Studios Retrospective, talking about Dishonored, Death of the Outsider, as well as just a little bit talking about what the future of Dishonored could look like. I'm your host, the envisioned cultist, Dilmas, and I have with me the eyeless, Kirklin Patzer. How you doing today?
Very good to be here. I'm excited to talk about yet another Arcane Retro. I feel like that's the only gaming thing I'm discussing this year, but that's fine. It's fine with me.
I've just been playing like remakes and arcane games. That's like nothing, barely anything new. It feels like. Of course, we're also enjoyed by the. You kind of stole my nickname, the Envision, Dante.
I just realized I was like, oh, I got a good name, and then I just looked up as you said yours, and I was like, wait, damn, smooth. I'll change it halfway through, and then we'll.
Sure, I'll update your nickname as we get through this thing.
I'll just be a copycat.
Sure, yeah, that's a good. Or what's the name? What's the name of that ability? I guess like the face stealing. The face stealing, that could be a good one. The semblance, yeah, that could be a good one.
Too late now. Real smooth on my part.
Yeah. So yeah, for anyone who is just joining us here, this is the fifth episode. So of course, go back, check out Arx Fatalis and Dark Messiah, and then of course we covered Dishonored and all the DLC, and then Dishonored 2, leading into the third Dishonored game. Not quite Dishonored 3, not quite DLC for 2, kind of a weird spin-off existing in a space in between the cracks in the slab on that one. So that's what we're talking about today. Very excited about that. And then, yeah, so if anyone's listening to this kind of as it's releasing, going to be a bit of a break. Well, as next week, I'm going to release Deathloop, that review. I'm going to put that back on the feeds. Then there's going to be just an empty week. And then after that will be Redfall, I think. Or, sorry, Prey. And then that'll close out the retrospective part of it. And then the week after that is when Redfall hits. And then the rankings, we're just going to push that down the road at this point because I'm going away in May and we're all busy. So I don't think we're going to do rankings before that game comes out, but that's totally okay. So that's kind of the schedule for this thing. Okay, we have the updated Eye of the Dead God. Dante, welcome back to the podcast. How are you doing?
I wasn't here in the beginning. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, you're a new person. Oh, I love it. Okay, so let's just get right into it. So yeah, we've gone through Dishonored 1 and 2. Obviously, we all had great love for Dishonored 1. I think all of us really enjoyed Dishonored 2 now that Kirkland's been in there. And this is a bit of a weird case where, Dante, you played this game when it came out, and you've played through the whole thing before, and you're doing another playthrough here. Kirkland, just like Dishonored 2, is your first time here. And then I'm kind of existing in the middle where I got this game at launch, of course, and I played it, and I think now that I've played through it again, I'm like, I think I was only on the second level, and then I bailed. And I think I know why that is because when I was playing Dishonored 2 on my PC when this game came out, you know, my PC, not the newest hardware on the scene, and I had like some frame rate issues, especially in like a high chaos setting. If there's enemies everywhere, holy shit, it gets like, sometimes it gets pretty framey and stuff like that. And also, I mean, Dishonored 2 had a lot of like issues on performance issues at launch and stuff, so a lot of that has been fixed, and so obviously I was playing through Dishonored 2 like on PC for the retro, and everything was good there. But I think because of that, back in the day, I was like, hey, I'm gonna get Death of the Outsider on PS4 because I think that will be a good way for me to have a bit better performance. It'll look better. I can play it on the TV and all that stuff. And I feel like that's honestly a big reason why I dipped, is because Dishonored to me is a mouse and keyboard ass game, and it felt really weird to play it on a controller. It felt very stiff and stuff like that, and I think that was probably part of the reason. Also, maybe just like Dishonored 2 had come out the year before, Prey came out earlier that year, and maybe I was a bit arcaned out at the time of when this game released. Maybe that's part of it too, but I've gone through and played through the whole thing now again on PC. I downloaded on like through Game Pass, and like it ran just fine. I mean, it ran as good as Dishonored 2 because it's the same engine as that. So I don't know why I was feeling that way all those years ago, but now that we're into it, I'm just gonna keep going here. I love playing through this game. It is so interesting the way it kind of takes the Dishonored formula and switches it up, existing as a spin-off and not quite Dishonored 2 DLC. I think they gave them a lot of freedom to try a bunch of new things, like removing mana regeneration is like just a constant thing. You don't need to get mana regeneration potions, whatever those are called. I always forget the name. Just some of the design in terms of how you go through the levels. There's a bit more freedom there, obviously taking out the chaos system. Like, there's a ton of changes that I really, really love. And obviously this game's a bit shorter than a Dishonored 1 or 2, even shorter than I guess probably about on par with the Dishonored 1 DLC if you stitched all that together between Brigmore and Knife of Dunwall. And so, yeah, maybe it's a bit shorter than I think that maybe when we get to the ranking, this will be tricky for me because I loved every second of this. I think there's a lot of great stuff here, but it is like kind of a shorter experience, even shorter than Dark Messiah and all that stuff. So had a really great time with this. I'm excited to talk about some of these levels and all these new features and whatnot. And yeah, I think for me, one of the most interesting things about playing through this was seeing the direct line from this to Deathloop. It's like, man, Deathloop really took a lot of what they innovated by specifically Death of the Outsider, even from Dishonored 2 to Deathloop. Obviously, you can see a lot of similarities there, same studio and a lot of that blinking and stuff like that. But I feel like specifically Death of the Outsider, I'm like, man, they really ripped a lot out of this game and dumped it right in there, even sometimes 1-to-1 in terms of some of the mechanics there. So really enjoyed my time with this, and I'm excited to talk about it. I'm glad I have finally played through this thing. And yeah, it exists as this weird little, not quite Dishonored 3, but somewhat of a 2.5, I guess you could say. So throwing over to Dante next, because you played this game at release. Can you remember like how you felt about it when you first played it, and then how have your thoughts kind of evolved on it playing through it again now?
Yeah. So both times I think I have maybe done this game a little bit of a disservice. So every single time I play this, I've played the other two right before it, and I feel fatigue a little bit by the time that I get to this one. And I don't think that's at fault of this game at all. It's just like that's how I tend to enjoy Dishonored. It's every single time I go back and play the Dishonored series, like it's like I'm playing through all of it. And yeah, it just ends up being a lot. Outside of that, I do think it is a really good at times like nice bow on the Dishonored series. I think it does tie up a lot of loose ends that were necessary to tie up at the end of 2. I think they leave a lot of things kind of still open to interpretation, and there's a lot of characters that you're still like, well, what the hell happened to them? Yeah. And it's really nice to get an answer for a lot of those questions they leave open. I will probably have a slightly different play through experience than you guys as well, because I am playing this as in that New Game Plus format again.
Right.
And then this one is really interesting. So a little bit about Death of the Outsider. Like Billy Lurk does not have a lot of the same kind of outsider abilities that that Corvo and Emily had. She has a lot more like tools and like things like that at her disposal. But if you're playing a New Game Plus, she does get those. So I had a lot of Corvo's abilities to use throughout this playthrough, which made this honestly like way more entertaining than I think my first playthrough was, which I think is really cool, and they push you to experience the game a little differently. It feels more like a thief or something like that. It's not so spell focused. But I tell you what, I was using all types of domino effects and teleporting all over the place, and it was a fucking blast. So,
yeah,
no
it's interesting. They call it Original Game Plus, and so you get some of like Emily's powers, and I guess therefore like a bit of Corvo's elements of that. So yeah, we'll talk about those modes, and there's even like a Mission Plus mode where you can use all of Billy's powers along with all of those Emily powers, like all in one, which is kind of an interesting like fusion of the two, and that works a bit differently than a New Game Plus because you just pick individual chapters and play through them that way. But that's kind of cool. Yeah, I guess. Well, we'll talk about the playstyles after. I guess we'll throw over to Kirkland. How was your experience? Once again, like Dishonored 2 was a fresh experience. You're getting a lot of new Dishonored content here in 2023.
Yeah, this was extremely fresh. I hadn't even booted up this one before. Dishonored 2, I think I had played through like the first mission, I think, initially at one point in time. But yeah, just jumping into it. Like I remember even back when I hadn't beaten Dishonored 2 and then this came out, I was just like, what is this game? Like this is so strange to me. Like this is a random character that I've never seen before, because I hadn't played the Dishonored 1 DLC at that time. And then just like the Death of the Outsider, like that concept, I'm like, I don't know if I like this. At this time I had only played Dishonored 1, so I really liked that version of the Outsider. Dishonored 2 not so much, so I feel like now it's a lot more palatable jumping into this one, be like, okay, yeah, I think I'm ready to take out the Outsider. And this game just it really works, which is something that I was kind of hesitant to accept, I think, jumping into it initially, or at least the concept. It was just something that I always saw the Outsider as just this thing that just lives in between the worlds and is just untouchable, which it pretty much is the case, but I really think that this game did a really good job of just tackling that concept and making it palatable. And to your point, Dante, like it felt like a nice little bow kind of on the series overall. I know we'll talk about that a little bit later, but yeah, overall I had a really good time with this. It was really fun to be playing as a different character than Corvo or Emily, like just someone like that's been kind of adjacent to their story. Like she has definitely felt just the effect of the outsider, even without being marked. And I thought that was kind of an interesting situation to be in. I really, really liked her gadgets and powers, and yeah, just being someone that isn't marked by the outsider, but still is like touched by it. So I really like that concept. I really liked all the levels and missions, and I feel like the runtime, it was shorter, but I still found myself like really, I don't want to say stuck at parts, but just really like wandering through the world and really just making it last. So it really felt like a full length game where I think before I jumped in, I was just like, oh, is this going to feel like a DLC that they just kind of worked into a full scale game to just better, I don't know, better their sales or whatnot. But it really feels separate from that. So I think it really works. And yeah, overall, I was really satisfied with the ending too. I liked seeing some memorable character pop back in, so that was really cool. And yeah, overall, I had a really, really good time with this one. I think it's still like noticeably lesser than the other ones for me, just because I have so much attachment for those characters, and I like Billy and everything, but I just like the whole being betrayed storyline is just so much more interesting to me for the Dishonored series. But yeah, overall, I really, really enjoyed this one, and it was a nice, just kind of like breath of fresh air too, because it does feel different. Like Dante, you mentioned, like it kind of feeling more of like a thief versus a full on just whatever you would call Dishonored, a super jacked up power onslaught action adventure. But I still think it worked really well, and yeah, I had lots of fun with this one. And some certain like missions that it had that Arkane feel where it was like going through those missions for the first time. It felt like, oh my gosh, like what am I getting into here? Maybe not to the full extent to what that second game did, especially with, you know, two particular levels, but still, I think it was really creative with just their level design, and not the most memorable like antagonist by any means, but I don't think it really needed that too much.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, when we talked about Dishonored 1 and 2, we all kind of shared like, oh, this is the playthrough I did this time. I did low chaos, or I did non-lethal, or I was like playing high chaos. So we can't really do that necessarily this time. We can talk about that, but it's a bit different because they've taken out the chaos system in the way that it exists, at least in Dishonored 1 and 2. So, I mean, I think there's a few reasons why they did that. One would probably just be because of the length of the game. Maybe they felt like, maybe they even had it in early prototypes and they just felt like, okay, with only like 4 or 5 levels, just, you know, seeing the results of your actions wouldn't be as impactful as like, okay, the rat population and guard quantities and stuff like that. But it almost feels like it's taken out, but it still exists in the same way. You know, you're going to one location twice and you can like see the results of some of your actions. So there is still consequences in a good way. Like they didn't take out that part. It almost just feels like they strictly took out the thing at the end of the level that says what kind of way you were playing, because they even still have that rubric, right, of like, okay, I was non-lethal, you know, all that, like I was getting spotted and whatnot. So they still have all of that, but they just don't have the thing that tells you that you're in high or low chaos. And I think that almost just shows me like, okay, you almost don't really need it in a way. I also feel like it's just part of Billy's character that it's like less impactful for her whether or not she's killing a lot of people, right? Where someone like Emily, like that's quite a, you know, drift for her character to be just slaying people by the hundreds. Or someone like Dowd, where it, like that whole DLC is about like him trying to change his ways and stop killing people, and so obviously the game needs to kind of react to that in a way. But Billy just like doesn't really care about any of that. Like she's kind of doing her own thing, so I feel like it fits in that way. But yeah, how did you guys feel about that? Do you feel like you noticed it at all? Really, beyond the fact that it like doesn't have the marker at the end of it, or you can't say you officially did a low chaos or a high chaos playthrough in this?
You notice it. I think it's impossible to miss, but I don't think I mind it. There's some. I'm not gonna get into that now because I'm sure we'll get into it. But there are like still some good bad ending playthrough style options. Like you can still kind of go for the bad guy good guy ending. So you still have that. It just feels like it's more tied to like specific choices in that moment than it is about like the choices you make throughout the entire game. But yeah, like Dylan, I think that has to be the reason, right? Like you can't have, what is it, 4 or 5 levels? Was it 5 levels? And after the first and second level have these like drastic changes to the third. It's like, okay, you haven't even really gotten an opportunity to feel things out and decide kind of what route you want to go in. Whereas like in the previous ones, you have like dozens or like, I don't know, quite a few levels to go. Okay, maybe I spent the first 3 and I was caught every 5 seconds, but like I really like got into my flow, and now I'm going like low chaos mode. Whereas in this one, it's like, all right, you screw up once or twice in the first 2 levels, you're like low chaos or lower high chaos probably for the rest of the game. So I don't mind it. Once again, I feel like it fits Billy's character quite a bit. Like you said, she has less skin in that game. She's not so worried about the implications of like the nation and stuff like that. It's a much more personal story, and she's just trying to get to her end goal ultimately. Whatever way she can get there. So I also like the there's a little less stress in deciding which direction you need.
Sure. Yeah, I like the freedom to it. Actually plays nice. That's something where you can feel like in Deathloop they were like, yeah, let's not have a chaos system. Instead, just each time you pop into a level, you can decide in that moment how you want to play through it, and it will not affect your overall like gameplay experience or like your endings and stuff like that, right?
It reminded me of a little bit of like Dark Messiah, because in Dark Messiah, it's not like your actions are like changing the world around you, but there's certain key moments that like lead you down the good path or the bad path.
Particularly at like the end of the game, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then it changes like the end credits, or sorry, like the end cinematic, which is kind of what happens here. And I definitely played a lot more like stealth oriented, not so high chaos. So I feel like I just didn't really pick up on like the world changing, because if you play low chaos, usually the world doesn't like change too much anyways from where it is, maybe less rats or whatnot. But yeah, it is kind of interesting how they still have those deciding factors when it comes to like your overall like how you're going to tackle something, but it's not shaping the world around you. But like to your guys' point, like I feel like it does kind of make sense with what your character is. Like Corvo, his decisions are definitely changing like Dunwall around him, but also just kind of like if Emily's still around, like his or her perception of him and like how she's gonna kind of grow up of like being this evil or good character. So that's kind of the weight there. And then you brought up Dylan in Dishonored too, like Emily's decision is kind of how she's gonna run her her country, and if she's gonna be this tyrannical ruler or, you know, a more good person. So but for Billy, like she's always kind of been like a paid assassin, and like that's kind of on her own terms, and this is a very personal story. And I don't know, maybe if there's just more characters like the Deirdre character, like maybe if she was still around, like maybe that's something that you could see the effect of her actions. But because she has no one really around her anymore, like this is just a personal journey. So I definitely think it fits.
I wanted to mention that too. I feel like this game felt like a lot more of a lonely experience in a good way. And yeah, I think that's part of it too, of like, obviously the actions you're choosing in these games, it are often like almost parroted back to you through those side characters, whether it's like Emily and like the severity of the things she's saying in Dishonored 1, or like the paintings and stuff like that, or someone like a Samuel and whatnot. And then even like the way Billy will react to you, like kind of towards the end of Dishonored 2, and whether or not she actually wants to like help you. In the end, it depends on like, you know, how vicious and of a person you were. But yeah, I think without having that, or Dowd is just, he's chilling, but he's an old man. He's checked out. And all he cares about is that one decision you make at the very end. He does not really care about what you do to get to that. He's not like, wow, you killed too many people in Upper Syria. I'm like really saddened by this. That would be really cheesy if that was the case. So I think that like loneliness of it works into it. But we don't necessarily need to start talking about Upper Syria, but I want to talk, like, I think that's kind of the way in which you most see the consequences of your actions, because you're going to that place kind of during the day, and then you're coming back at night and seeing just how it's changed. Even those, I don't know if it's that same day. I don't know if it's supposed to be like a couple days later, but then it's nighttime, or if it's literally like a few hours have gone by between the times you're going back there. But you know, you can see just a ton of the consequences there, where I was, you know, going pretty ham. I was killing a lot of people as Billy, because I think in Dishonored 2, when I was playing through it this time, obviously it was like full like low chaos, like non-lethality. I was like, I should probably just really dig into like some of the combat here and experience some of this stuff. And yeah, just seeing certain things. Like I pretty much killed every single person at the Spectre Club, and then that ended up just being closed and like just completely locked off at the nighttime. I couldn't even go in there because there's no one there anymore. Or the mime, he died, and then someone else takes his place to like selling newspapers and whatnot. And then I didn't even pick up on some of these details, but like obviously the interesting thing with let's just talk about Upper Syria because that's like such a big location in this game. But big part of that too is you kind of have two quote unquote targets there. You have the singer, and then you have Jacoby, that kind of like political guy, and you can choose to dispatch them in different ways. But there are like just looking up, especially on the wiki afterwards, like all the ways that your decisions on what you do to them can affect what goes on in the world. Like I think because there's Jacoby and there's like Aelina, I think is her name, and they're like kind of seeing each other and whatnot. And depending on what you do to them, like either one of them can like kill themselves, and you find that out in the night based on just like what you've done to them during the day and stuff like that, which is like super interesting. And obviously, it's like that shop as well with the blood flies and how you choose to. If you do anything to that at all, that will change what happens there at the nighttime and stuff like that. So I still felt like I got enough of a fix of like, okay, my actions have consequences, particularly with just this one level. And then obviously the end of the game is, reacting to what you do in that like final cutscene there as well. So I feel like I still got enough of that chaos system there.
That one in particular was really like the Deathloop similarities there of just like certain ways that you would tackle something and like how you're just laying out like how a certain character might react differently. I don't think it goes exactly that route in Deathloop, but just especially like coming back to the event after you've done it, like that's where you definitely seeing the blueprint for that one and just how they expanded upon in Deathloop there. But yeah, no, I really liked. I mean, I didn't really like pop off in the nightclub there, so it didn't really change too much when I came back to it. I did like how you had like your different what were they even called? Like your different it wasn't targets or something. It wasn't even bounties. What was a different name?
Right?
Yeah, your contracts. That was something that again like felt very different from the other two and just felt very Billy oriented, and I feel like that's something that kind of changed the formula of tackling just your objectives in this game, for example there. But
yeah, I because like talking more about the design without even getting specifics for Upper Syria, but I felt like there was a ton of like Hitman inspiration there, and I don't know if that like if there's a direct line there because Hitman, like the first one of the new trilogy, came out in 2016, so you feel like that would be pretty close to the line of when they were developing this. But maybe they did get a couple ideas, but there were certain things too where I just felt like the design of that level being so interesting, where there's like multiple targets kind of in different parts of the city, and you can go and take them out in whatever order you choose, and obviously you can take them out in different ways in the classic Dishonored kind of way. But I really liked that, and like the black market I think worked well there, where we talked about that with Clockwork Mansion. I came back to that black market a couple times as I was playing through that level. I'd take the tram back down and then go back to the shop, and I felt like that was definitely the case here, where I visited that shopkeeper multiple times. The way it was designed in almost like there's a big kind of circle around and then like shortcuts through the middle and whatnot, because you're just kind of going back and forth through that level. And I found that to be like a really enjoyable way to go through it. And obviously some of it is just like regular city streets where you can walk around and there's citizens that you can talk to and stuff like that. And then there's obviously the guarded areas where you are can't just walk around freely, well, unless you use a certain ability. But yeah, I thought that was so interesting. Beyond that too, like even this is obviously a thing in Dishonored where you can like throw a glass bottle into a room, the guard will hear it, they'll go investigate, and you can like knock them out. So many games have that same kind of stealth mechanic, but I thought like it felt like they really doubled down on that by making that part of your toolkit, that you would just always have the hag pearl on you in your shooter, and you can just shoot that, rather than like in Dishonored I don't really do that very much, because like I'm not just carrying a bottle most of the time, or like if I need it, it's like I'm not going to go through the effort to go get a bottle and like set up this whole thing. But they obviously just like made that part of your toolkit, which feels like a very Hitman-y sort of thing. Even like, man, Upper Syria, like there's multiple exits, right? You can like go back to the tram, or you can like take the boat and go out that way, which once again a very kind of Hitman-y thing. And then even just like we'll talk about Mission Plus a bit later on, but that to me kind of felt like that way too, where they're more like, you know what, just go back into an individual level with all these tools and mess around and try different things and have fun, and don't worry about the structure of the game so much. Don't worry about like the overarching story. Just like go into an individual level and play with it how you want. So, and then obviously on top of all of that, most maybe clear example is the disguise system to it, like being able to appear as someone and get like different levels of clearance based on what person you're looking at. Obviously it's more limited than it is in Hitman, where you can just, you know, wear a costume for as long as you want. It doesn't work the same way there, but I playing through this a lot, and obviously I've been playing a ton of Hitman this year and even played some more like yesterday. I'm noticing a lot of like similarities there, and I wonder if there was any sort of inspiration there, or if they just had similar ideas as IO Interactive around the same time.
It's a great game to take inspiration from.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like they've really gone in depth with just what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm curious because like there's definitely a need to fill some space in this game, right? Like if it was just these 5 levels and there was no like side mission kind of opportunities, it would feel very brief.
Yeah,
it would go
I
quick.
think that does a really good. It's a really interesting way to pad out the story. It doesn't feel like super tacked on or anything like that. It feels like it once again suits Billy's background, but yeah, I wonder if they naturally did take it from Hitman, or if it was just one of those things that's like, okay, what would fit in this game well. I can't imagine too many other
that dog just erupted out of nowhere.
I swear, like out of his armpit or something. Yeah.
she was under the desk.
Yeah, I mean, because obviously there's earlier Hitman games too, and they have a lot of those same features. So obviously it's like they could have played those earlier games or something. But just the timing of like, okay, that game came out 2016, this 2017 feels a bit close. But I'm sure the development on this started before that game came out. But anyway, I just wanted to bring that up, as I felt like there was maybe something going on there. Maybe let's talk about like a little bit about the kind of Dishonored, Death of the Outsider to Deathloop trajectory that I was talking about too, because I'm sure you guys noticed that too, where obviously like the removal of the chaos system in Deathloop as well, they took out that like the mana system, and that it just regenerates based on time rather than having to get the elixirs and stuff like that and recharge them. Even like there's a ton of abilities, and that part's more obvious, where like every, you know, Arkane game these days has a blink of some sort. But the face steal ability semblance, like obviously Juliana has that. If you play as her, you can like mimic any of the like what are they called? What are the name of like the goons in that game?
Visionaries. Right?
No, the visionaries are like
that's
the main
people.
targets.
Oh, what are they called?
I'm totally drawing a blank, man.
Oh man, I can't remember. It's gonna come to me.
Distinct look to them. They all have this kind of like
The masks and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
masks. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, those guys. Even like, yeah, contracts is something that I feel like Deathloop had, because you're playing through the same 4 maps over and over again. They need to add a lot of things you can do, and obviously the main goal to get the golden loop, you have to do what are kind of feel like side quest little things to change what happens in future loops. But there's a ton of other stuff as well that is just random little side quests you can do to just learn more about the world and experience different stuff. But one of the things to me that just felt like the funniest connection I noticed was in Deathloop. Obviously, like you're going around, you're collecting the residuum. I forget how you pronounce it, by just like, you know, holding on like those things that are kind of glitched out in the loop. And like you're doing that in this game too, where you're just going around. There's certain things that are glitched out in a very similar looking way, and you go up and you absorb them. Then that's almost like a bit of a heart in a way, because you get like a bit of a dialogue from the outsider. He tells you something. So I thought that was like a funny little thing that for some reason they decided to grab that over. And then kind of just that idea too that you mentioned, Kirkland, of going to Upper Syrian day and then night, like having these different locations and seeing how it's changes in the course of a day is obviously a big part of Deathloop. But all these locations you can access it 3-4 times of day. And then even like the conservatory too. So we'll talk about that later too. But they took a level from Dishonored 2 and just like painted it over and did a ton of changes. It feels like a wholly new level to me. But like taking that idea of, okay, let's like visit a place we've been before, but then just like make some subtle and not so subtle changes to like, okay, we've already done all of this work to build one very, very highly detailed level. What kind of little changes can we make to it and make it feel like a wholly new experience? So in those ways, I was getting a lot of Deathloop vibes from this game, and maybe like the more action focus of it, even though Kirkland sounds like you played pretty stealth oriented. Obviously you can still play that way if you want to.
Yeah, I remember even making that comment on the Dishonored 2 retro of just like, okay, you're kind of getting your what's it called, like your oh my gosh, it's like the full layout of like your plan, and like
Sure,
you have
yeah.
like just piecing together like your investigation. Like that's essentially what the whole Deathloop thing is, and just like the journals and all of those things. Like it really seems like they got their structure for what Deathloop was going to be, and then yeah, playing this one with like the exact same like visual of like the residuum like collection there, the resemblance, like I'm pretty sure it even like looked the exact same like when Juliana's like putting it on.
Kind of weird masks, right? Like they
Yeah.
almost look the same. Yeah.
So definitely I saw those bleed through, and even just like yeah, like mentioning like the day and night like coming back to a certain event, but also just the maybe more like sandbox. I'm kind of using that term loosely, but like more sandbox way of tackling it. Like especially if you have like 4 different like missions or contracts to do in the actual level. It's not just like a set like linear like trajectory. Like there's not like my one enemy at the end of the level that's how I finish it. Like there is stuff that you're kind of doing inside of the level, and that's very much like what Deathloop is like. So yeah, I definitely saw those isms bleed through, which isn't a bad thing by any means. It's just it's kind of fun to see the origin of those decisions and systems.
Yeah.
I think we mentioned it almost every single podcast about every single game, talking about the previous game and the games that come after. Like Arkane might be one of the most like iterative developers I can think of, where you can see them continuously take ideas from the previous games and like just massage it into another game without making it feel like, okay, they're just reusing this over and over and over again. It always feels like it does fit in its new space, but then also just improving upon those things as well. I think they do a really good job of it. It gives them that developer a serious identity or like DNA that like maybe some other developers you don't always see that. Like you can really feel sometimes when like, okay, maybe a lot of the previous team left and like the second or third game in that series just completely separated from what those previously were. Like that they never feel that way. It feels like a really smooth transition from game to game. So if you like one Arkane game, you're kind of in. Like you will like all of them. There's really no reason that
Arx Fatalis might be the exception of that's pretty old and weird and different.
Don't start with that one. Don't start with that one.
But yeah, maybe starting with like the Dishonored series.
Yeah.
Everything that's come after so far has been like just proof that they can take a good idea and make it better every single time.
I feel a bit weird in that way, because if someone were to say to me that this is their favorite Dishonored game, I would totally get it, right? Just because of what you're saying of the iteration in terms of like game feel things and just like honing their design and how you navigate these levels and the inclusion of contracts and finding secrets and stuff like that feels like just some of the best. But then obviously it's like so much shorter than those other games, and you only have one character compared to like playing multiple characters in the other games. That maybe like it's so hard to compare them in that way. But I'm very excited to get to the rankings and see how we all factored that out at the end of the day. But a couple other kind of funny, just other Arkane similarities I noticed is one, the Envision cultists. I guess Kirkland, you haven't got there yet, but Dante, like, those feel like exactly like phantoms, do they not? Like those feel like the same. The way they move around, the way they like fuck with the lights, you know, when they're near anything, they just kind of have like this aura around them that just messes with the world around them.
That
it's weird, man, how close those things are.
Residue almost.
Yeah.
No, it is quite similar.
Which, you know, obviously these studios. He hasn't played Prey yet, I don't think. Right?
No.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so obviously, like, that's two separate Arkanes. This game released the same year as Prey, but like obviously those studios talk with each other and stuff like that. Because another thing too, and a couple like very direct things, is at one point I don't know where this is, but these are things I saw on the wiki. I did not find these myself, although I wish I did. Is at one point in the game there's like a locker, and like some of these lockers have names for the people who use these lockers, and one of them is Morgan Yu, who's the player character from Prey. Yep. So obviously that's like, okay, well obviously these studios are talking to each other.
There's a whole like story or like backstory about him being like an alcoholic from another place.
Oh, I totally missed that element of it. That's cool.
Because it's they're like sending you to like get stuff out of that locker specifically. Yeah, it's
okay. I love that.
Nice little nods to Prey, and I jumped right into Prey right afterwards.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is so cool.
And then another one too is like in the dentist office in Upper Syria. There's you can I guess there's like what would be like a model. It looks like some weird experimental dental thing, but it's essentially just like exactly what it looks like when they insert a neuromod into a character in Prey. So it's like obviously those two things are very directly like, shout out to our other Arkane Studio, little Easter egg sort of things you could say. And then one that this is like maybe a bit of a stretch, but I love that a big part of the story in this game is essentially getting the ultimate weapon, so you can kill the outsider, which is just like what the back half of Arcs is all about, right? Is going to build this ultimate weapon so that you can take out the big bad at the end, which of course many games have a thing like that. The Master Sword is kind of that same idea too. So that's maybe a bit more on the generic side, but I love it still.
No, but like Master Sword is like an amazing connection too, because like it literally does get the same kind of like
the slash
attack.
Yeah.
Master Sword would as well, which I didn't even realize existed. Like I played through this game the entire first time through, and then I got to like the second to last level and like held the button down too long. And I was like, what did I just do? It was like laser beamed out of my sword. I did not know that this was possible. And I remember seeing like this weird particle effect on an enemy and being like, what the fuck just happened to that guy? And then moving on for like another like hour, and then like held the button down or something. I can't remember exactly what the like the button presses to make it happen, but I did it again and realized, oh my god, I have been missing this super powerful thing for far too long. Like I guess I do in every single Arkane game. I think I do have a tendency to just like fully miss mechanics in these games, which I think says a lot about how many mechanics they do offer you and the fact that not all of them are necessary.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Cool. But man, I always get like kind of upset when I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I think this like I don't know. I've played these games through multiple times and I'm still finding out like very basic mechanics.
I love that element of it. I really like that too. That it is almost like, yeah, here's just Wind Blast late into the game, but it's Wind Blast through a sword instead of just being the ability, because obviously you're not marked by the outsider in that same way. So I thought that was pretty cool.
It was Dylan. I looked it up. Eternalists. That was the name of the NPCs from
the Eternalists.
Deathloop.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, like let's talk more about some of these differences, I guess, with the character. I mean, progression is quite different here too, where you're not upgrading your powers in any way, right? You don't even collect runes in this game. That's the big change. You still get bone charms, so we'll talk about that as well. But I didn't feel like. I mean, I guess the bone charms is how you get upgrades for those abilities, right? Because so many of them change, like give you additional upgrades to them and stuff like that. So I guess they just shifted that. How do you guys feel about that change? Do you think that's good, bad? Do you feel like it's kind of just neutral? It almost doesn't impact the game? How did you think about that?
I maybe missed the progression a little. I'd say is like probably the only thing that I like. Bone charms just felt so much like a mechanic from the previous games where it's like, okay, maybe like fine-tune your build a little bit more. Like this really is the only way to fine-tune your build. You get all the same tools, right? Like, oh, I guess you do have the upgrade tree when you go to the black market, so that is maybe very similar to the way
right.
it is in Dishonored 2, which I don't think we really even talked about that much in Dishonored 2. Like, you have this whole upgrade tree for all of your different gear. So you can do that, but I feel like if you do a lot of the side quests and you get plenty of money, you can get a lot of that stuff. So it doesn't feel like you're necessarily being held back to play exactly how you want to, which is good and bad, right? It doesn't necessarily make you focus into a build, which I enjoy. I feel like I'm being hypocritical because I said previously, like I like, or in like a different one of the earlier podcasts, like I like to know how many points I do have going forward, so I can build out something. But I guess it is nice to know that like, hey, at least I'm going to get everything, so I don't have to worry about it so much. Whereas like the bone charms are really the only opportunity Billy gets to like shake it up or change how her powers. Or powers.
Yeah, change her build out a little bit.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I feel like I was kind of there as well, of like missing that hunting for the runes. It's a very Dishonored thing, but also like it is kind of tedious in a sense too sometimes. So I feel like I prefer actually just leaving them out for this, and it also just for like lore wise, it kind of fits better that way because she's not marked by the outsider. Like she definitely. Air quotes is marked by the outsider with her arm and her eye and everything, but like she doesn't have the actual mark. So I think yeah, like for gameplay wise and lore wise, like I'm pretty acceptable with the route that they went for it. And like the whale charms, I feel like that being something that's not directly tied to people having to be marked by the outsider, like they definitely have influence in the world, and that's something also that this game kind of went into a little bit deeper, I found at least, than the other ones did, was more of just the whole influence of the outsider, and coming from like the Abby's perspective, just regular Joe's kind of perspective. Like I think there's a couple dialogue that Billy had with herself, of just like finding a like whale charm and hearing a story of like a child that like thought that it would make him bulletproof and like shot himself, and he like bled out because of it. So it kind of was just like throwing in these like difficult, what's the best way to phrase this? Like a
situations.
yeah, exactly. Like the bone charms, they aren't all positive. Like they actually have their negative outcomes from it, of just people believing in it, and maybe it having like a supernatural effect, but not to the full extent that someone might believe. And I just thought that was a kind of fun idea to tackle, because we've been experiencing the outsider and just the outsider's influence throughout these 3 games now, but like this is just a different look on it, and kind of made it, I mean, the outsider is living in that gray area, but this really like shined a light on that gray area, and I really appreciate it for that sense. And just because like in the first game, like I was just like all for the outsider. I'm like, this is awesome, like there's no negatives to following the outsider. You just get these awesome powers, you can pop off, kill like corrupt officials, and then here we are in like the 3rd game, it's like, oh, okay, no, this isn't all good or bad in that sense.
They do give you, and I feel like you have to read into it incredibly hard. They give one negative to following the outsider in the first one, and it is Granny Rags, right? She like
true.
She clearly has like lost her mind because of this thing, and I don't know if that's necessarily like independent to her, if this is just the route that everybody takes. Like they lose themselves to it.
Yeah,
but it's really barely put in your face that there's like, any real negatives to this thing.
No,
yeah. I guess I felt for me like the bone charms too, just because of the progression element of like you can swap them out and stuff like that. I found by like the last level, or even the second to last level, I was like, man, I've picked up so many bone charms, and I am like burnt out of going to this menu and changing this stuff out. Like I'm pretty powerful at this point. Yes, some of them are cool, but like it felt like a bit too much. So I feel like it to me was almost maybe too much bone charm for how short the game is, I guess. And that's where something like having the variety of going to the shops and upgrading, but of course you can't do that in every level. Having the runes and then having the bone charms almost as like a nice like collection of 3 different things to do, and so taking out one of them didn't necessarily add to the experience, but I don't think it like harmed it too much either. I think for me too, like there is the bone charm crafting, and that obviously is not a skill that you have to upgrade to get better use of it. It's something you can just use, but I found like so many of those things, either the ones that have kind of the pro that come with the con, or just I think the black bone charms that are stronger, but you can't use those effects like to craft bone charms. I felt like I was using so many of those for the build that I wanted that I only had 1 or 2 slots for like crafted bone charms or basic bone charms, and those abilities were just felt so underwhelming, even if you had 4 of them stacked on top of each other, in the way that I could really cheese and make some really crazy stealth builds in Dishonored 2. I didn't feel as compelled to do that here, so I think it like in some ways it kind of missed the mark. But I also don't know how much I really care. Like I feel like when I play this game now, I want to do a full playthrough of Original Game Plus at some point just to see what that's like. But then I feel like Mission Plus is the best way to go with this game, because then you get all of the abilities, all of Billy's and all of like those Emily abilities. Plus, like you can get the stun mine, which I don't think is in the base game at all. They just throw the stun mine in there as like an added equipment thing as well.
That's an Original Game Plus as well.
Okay, yeah, but yeah, not in like the I guess base game, yeah. So I don't know. I feel like that's like the way to move forward. And then I gotta say, taking out like the mana potions and just making that a constantly recharging thing, and you have these different like I guess dials or whatever you want to call those things. That is an amazing change. And if they ever do a remake, remaster, or something of Dishonored 1 and 2, I would love if they took out mana regeneration the way those games work and just incorporate this. They're way better, way better. For me, it's just like that's a net positive. It just plays better. You don't have to do the thing in Dishonored where like, okay, I'm going to use my blink, but then I'm going to wait to recharge because I want to be efficient with my mana consumption. Or like, you know, I most of the time in Dishonored 2, I had like, you know, 8 or 9 like mana things. So I wasn't running out, but I still, just the freedom that this system gives you, I think works so much better. And obviously they did that with Deathloop as well. And I think they'll probably use that going forward. And I don't know, it just feels so much better for me. That's a great change as far as I'm concerned.
I agree. I remember back in like Dishonored 1, just always being annoyed that I had to like, in order to be like efficient, I had to wait those like 3 seconds or something for it to like regen or something. And then I was always just making the compare. I'm like, man, Dowd, he's never slowing down. Like when I'm seeing him just blink around or his assassins, like, come on, what is this? I have to like wait.
How
all
big
these
is his
seconds.
mana pool? What's going on?
You've got so many like of the like Sokolovs. Like
It's like Pietro's was the blue
Yeah.
one.
He's just
in the first
chugging
game, and then they
them
changed it in the
constantly
second
the
one.
whole game.
He's got
Oh,
like
that's
a like
hilarious.
camelback on.
Yeah, I got one of those beer things. Oh, I'd love if they incorporated that into his look. Let's take our first break. We'll be right back. Okay, so let's talk more about these individual abilities. So obviously Billy has some new things here. So Displace is every character in the Dishonored universe has a slightly different version of Blink, and this one it kind of works interestingly where you place down what is essentially a mark, and then you're swapping places with it, and then once again like through the bone charms, there's a lot of different ways you can change this, and once I got the ability to do the instant teleport too, that was great, and I love that because that just works as like a quick click or holding it down. You could still do either one. You weren't like locked out of the regular Displace if you put that bone charm on. So that felt great. I think that's a really great teleport. Really enjoyed how they somehow keep innovating on like the way that teleport works and functions. And I gotta say, maybe my favorite thing is fucking teleporting into someone and them just exploding into a million pieces or multiple people, and just like the sound, the fact that it takes out like half of your health and like your screen just goes fully red. I love that. That was so much fun to mess around with. It was just the goofiest thing, and anytime I could, I got the opportunity to. And trying to do that in the middle of a combat sequence too is pretty hard to like line up, to make sure the enemy is exactly where you need them to be to get that. I would often end up just like teleporting right behind them, and then they'd be like, where'd he go? And it almost felt like in Fable, Kirkland, that ability where you like just teleport behind someone really quick. I just felt like I was doing oh, you're a fucking Fable monster over here. It felt like I was doing the Assassin's Rush a lot of the time too. So that was maybe my favorite like addition with that ability. But overall, I think they did a great way of, here's a new Blink and it feels totally different and it looks cool too with like placing them.
Oh yeah. I little bit hesitant to say, but I feel like that's my favorite interpretation of the Blink too. Like it is hard to beat just the original one because that kind of set it all off.
Well, you essentially get that upgrade for it anyway, so it's like, well, it's just that plus other functionality to it. So
yeah, true. But like coming into the game, I knew I was going to be one of the abilities because every single Dishonored game and following with Deathloop, I don't know if Prey has it. I'm assuming something.
Prey is like a dash. I don't think there's like a blink, right?
You can upgrade that thing to
make it like a blink. Yeah.
I was still just curious how they're gonna like innovate on it, but like this one feels extremely different from all the other ones, and it's funny you mentioning like the attack that you kind of do with it of like going into someone. I did that accidentally once, and I was like shocked. I'm like, oh my god, like did I just break the game? Kind of blew my mind.
Limbs all over the place. Oh my god.
I think up until that point too, I didn't kill anyone on that particular like mission, and then just someone exploded. I'm like, okay, well there's
it's
all
so
the evidence.
Loud too. It's so
it scares the hell out of you, especially if you're playing in the wee hours of the evening.
Yeah. Dante, your thoughts on that?
Sorry. I think I missed the question. I apologize.
No, I don't know. Any thoughts on like the Displace? Anything beyond what we said?
I didn't use it. That's why I was like, nodding along. No, because I didn't. I had the original game.
Oh, I guess this playthrough. Okay,
yeah. So I was just using the teleport like crazy. Like I was just using like Corvo's regular like dash forward.
Right.
I got through 90% of this game with like old school skills. It felt like a very different experience in my first one, and I played Death of the Outsider like the first time when it came out. So I was like, I don't think I also dashed into anyone doing this like incredible like tackle ability. It sounds like exists. Yeah, that's what I was saying. I think I had a pretty different experience than you guys probably had, because I was using a lot of the traditional skills outside of that fantastic like gravity mine thing. That thing.
Oh, the hook mine. Oh my god, I love the hook mine.
Because that thing is super super cool, and I don't know, just really novel. The fact that you can like throw that thing out and it just straight up silences them too when you get that thing upgraded. So it's just like people just like up in the air, like kind of in this just like nonverbal bubble.
Yeah.
The best.
Yeah, I love that thing.
The last thing I'll say on the displays, I really like just like the way that you'd kind of utilize it to get through like a puzzle or not like a big puzzle, but just like getting to a situation. Like you can kind of like go through a vent and then like drop the displace, and then like as long as you're able to like see it, you're able to like dash through it. So it just kind of made going through some levels like just really unique, especially because I was only used to like the other versions, which they are different, but they are like you kind of have to see your trajectory. It's got like a set distance, so like they all kind of follow the same rules. Whereas this one felt very different. Like just like crawling. Like I love going through the vents, and couldn't possess anyone because I didn't have the original Game Plus or whatnot. On the next playthrough I will, but
I don't think possession's one of the abilities, is it, Dante?
No.
You get Domino, you get Blink.
Yeah, so that's the thing. I don't.
Do you get Shadow Walk? I don't think you get Shadow Walk, right?
You don't get Shadow Walk either. So, like I'm also now wondering if I even got Displace. I think maybe Displace.
Well, no, in Original Game Plus you don't. Yeah, you don't get the original abilities. Only in Mission Plus do you get Billy's and Emily's.
That's why, like, I was sitting here. I'm like, that's why I was like blanking and like I was just like, did I miss something? Like, I don't even think that exists.
It's a weird choice. I don't know why Original Game Plus does not also have those abilities. Like, I feel like that should be the way it is. You should get everything. It's like, you've already beaten the game. Like, let me screw around, which they do, Mission Plus, but, like, it is a bit of a weird decision. I also felt like when I booted up Original Game Plus, and I just played through the Baths level because I wanted to see what it was like. I didn't play through the whole game again. I was like, why didn't they do more abilities? Like, I feel like they should have just thrown every Dishonored 2 ability in there, or at least more of them, because you only get, like, 3, right? I know you get Domino, you get Blink, and then...
Yeah, let me pull it up, because I'm trying to remember.
One other one, maybe?
I have a tendency to, like, find my like top 2 or 3 abilities
and stick to them.
Same things over and over and over again. So I'll pull them up.
Put them on the Prime hotkey and just like spam those.
I literally, that's exactly what I do. I have like all of my mouse buttons mapped to the abilities I use, and I don't touch anything else.
I forgot about that too because I had never played Death of the Outsider on PC until this time. I forgot how many hotkeys I set for Dishonored 1 and 2 that are, since I've always played on the same PC, all those hotkeys are the same. But like, man, just putting everything, I can't get my mouse really into the camera very well, but like just, I used to have everything set up so like right click is always whatever the right hand action is, which I think the game defaults to the opposite of like your gun is, your sword is your left click. And your gun is, but then like the hands are opposite, so I've swapped that. And then like the button on the side of my mouse is like what I used to choke people at, which feels so good on like the side of the mouse to do that. And, like I have just so many hotkeys. It took me like, I feel like 20 minutes to like, oh, this is not right. I got to like adjust things and like set all the hotkeys. I was like, man, I forgot how many things I had adjusted to be just personalized to the way I've played Dishonored 1 and 2.
All right, so they trade out Displace, Foresight, and Semblance, and you get Blink, Domino, Dark Vision.
Right. Which is like, it feels kind of limited, right? Like, why don't they throw Shadow Walk in there, or
give me all 6,
or like the one where you create decoys and stuff? Like, it's weird.
The new game plus for Dishonored 2 was like a 10 out of 10 because you literally get all of Corvo's abilities, and if you do a new game plus with Emily, you get all of Emily's abilities as well, and it just feels like you're incredibly overpowered.
Yeah.
I forgot about all of these skills. Like that's why, like I don't know, I was glazing over a little bit because I was like,
you should boot up a level or 2 in Mission Plus, especially before the rankings, because I think a couple of them you should have the feel of them in the back of your head, because I'll be bringing up a couple of them for best abilities and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I definitely want to now because they it's been so long since I played through them, and I was like, man, I didn't remember. Like I guess Billy did just have Blink again.
Yeah. But it's quite different. And what I love about the Blink 2 is, going into like Foresight is this version of Dark Vision, and I just got the vibe that I was playing like in like the Halo 3 Forge mode, when you play as the little like fucking drone.
The Oracle.
Yeah, exactly. And you move around. It felt just like that. But moving around the map and like looking out stuff, like marking things, obviously is great. But then also. Yeah, but then also the fact that you can like place the displaced markers with that to get into really, like as you were saying with the vents, but you can do all sorts of weird stuff with that, like weird angles that you wouldn't normally be able to reach. I thought that was a really cool way that they blended the 2 abilities into one. And there's like, a bunch of ways that you can increase that foresight so that you can mark so many different things. Like you can mark like up to like 5 or 6, I think, different like either targets or bone charms and things like that. And so that was pretty cool as well. I like the way that they blended those, and that was like to me a more fun dark vision. I feel like I barely used dark vision in these most recent playthroughs of Dishonored 1 and 2, especially because I have a good feeling what the map layouts are like. I don't generally need that stuff, and the heart is how you find bone charms. But I thought it was pretty smart to make that a hybrid ability. That's how you see bone charms, and that's how you see enemies and things that you can interact with. I thought that was a nice way that they blended that all into one like super ability in a way.
They did the same for dark vision this time. They combined it with the heart, so they did that was nice there. But like,
I totally didn't think about that.
I don't know if you noticed, I was suspiciously quiet when you guys were talking about using semblance too, and I was just like, oh, like did I do this thing again? Like where I'm just like this big fool and I don't click on a button at all, and it's just like, no, it wasn't even available to me in this place.
That is a weird decision that they just have 3 and swap them out in that aspect.
I felt like I was just gonna spend the entire podcast going crazy, so I got down to the bottom of that pretty quickly.
Well, let's do a favor then. We'll talk semblance. We'll get it out of the way because we got to talk about this too, which is the ability to steal someone's face. And I say it that way because like it is a pretty visceral animation when this happens. Kirklin, like literally stealing someone's face.
Very bad.
They just become like this voided beast, and then you just like slap it on your face. And yeah, I really liked the way that this was balanced. I thought it was pretty interesting. Of course, you can upgrade it too with bone charms once again. But actually, very quick aside, Dante, in Original Game Plus, do bone charms upgrade your abilities in the same way that like you would get use rune upgrades to upgrade those skills in Dishonored 2?
No, they're just maxed out.
They're just maxed out all the time. Okay. Yeah, so I guess you'd have a bigger pool of bone charms at your disposal, where I felt like there was at least 3 or 4 or 5 that I was like, okay, I need this just to make this place like more usable and more functionality and stuff like that.
And it got to the point where like it's going back to the previous conversation a little bit, but like the runes felt like a really good reason for me to explore the world further.
Sure.
Whereas bone charms got to the point where I was just like, man, I've got enough.
Yeah, I'm powerful enough.
Yeah, so it got to the point where I was like, all right, am I gonna just like go into every nook and cranny, or am I gonna like figure out what the fuck is happening with this outsider? Like, and I kind of just started like main pathing it a little bit more than I have in any other Dishonored game.
Right.
I agree.
Which
actually.
I think is okay if it is a new game plus, right? Like you've played through the game before, you're kind of gonna cook through it anyway, so not a slight at all. But just interesting. It's just interesting. Like I'm kind of reeling at the fact that I did have a much more different experience than I realized I did.
Yeah. So talking more about semblance, then the balance of it, that it's your mana will drain just essentially based on how far or how much you move, rather than just like the amount of time you're in it. Like thinking about like possession, or like I think, is that how bend time works? Or I think bend time is just like you have 5 seconds or 10 seconds, whatever it is. But I thought that was pretty cool because there ends up being situations where, let's say I want to appear as this very specific kind of named character in this very particular part of the map, then I have to like bring their body across the map, place the body down before I steal their face. I did that to try and get into Shan's mansion. I was like, okay, I'm gonna bring this specific body over here. And so that was kind of a fun little stealth challenge. But then you have situations too where it's like, okay, I'm just going to pretend to be someone to get into that auction, and then I can sit down at this auction and just compete in this auction because the body's close enough, and I can just stay in this mode as long as I don't move too far away. So I thought the balance of it was pretty cool, and once again, you can upgrade it so you can make it pretty drastic. But yeah, it's not just like, okay, I can appear as a guard and then I can walk everywhere for the rest of the level. Like there's still a challenge to it where you can't just do that forever. And I don't think, Kirkland, I never actually tried this, but I don't think you can face steal the same person twice, right? Because you've already ripped their face off, right?
Yeah.
Or does their face go back to them? I actually never looked, so I'm not sure about that.
I never tried, but yeah, to your point, I feel like it makes sense if you're actually ripping off their face. That it's a one and done situation.
But I agree. There's a bunch of like unique interactions that can happen, whether it's like using a named character or something like the auction, and even once again looking at the wiki and just being like, wow, there are a ton of different ways that you can be like you can appear as a surprise character to someone, and they're like talking to you about it, and that's really cool and something that on multiple playthroughs I can't wait to just do some more. Like stretch the game as far as I can take it and see what kind of things the game they've accounted for.
It is somewhat comparable to like the body possession thing, obviously with
Sure.
its own twist and making it unique. But I remember having that thought too, even just going through Dishonored, like on multiple playthroughs. I'm like, oh my god, I didn't realize I could interact with like having a guard like shoot himself like with the possession ability, and it's same sort of thing like with the face steal, like having like a unique character and kind of how that interaction goes. And like to your point with actually the draining of your power for it, I really like how you kind of like the distance from the body is kind of how it works, and it makes you like how you already laid out, just like the way that you would tackle it, like you're actually bringing the body with you, and you're just getting a little bit more creative as opposed to just, okay, I'm just gonna steal it and then in 10 seconds it'll just go away. Like it's a lot more in depth to that, and I really like that they made that decision, because yeah, it's similar to body possession, but for all the reasons we just listed, like it is very much its own ability. And yeah, I love just like the rawness of you just taking their face. That's something where like Dishonored can get very dark and like gruesome, and that was a situation where
only
it's like,
Billy
oh
would
my
do
God.
that. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Like this random guy, I just ripped his freaking face off. So it kind of reminded me of like the Shadow Walk, how like that just feels this like demonic being. And
Right.
when you're like taking people out with it, like you just feel like a demon, and
you become the Dark Messiah.
yeah, exactly. I loved it. I loved all the detail with it. So yeah, that was a really cool ability. And again, as soon as I saw like the face, I'm like, oh man, Deathloop, look at that.
yeah, it has that vibe. And then I guess you got to mention that like rat whispering is another.
Yeah.
They put it in the powers page, I think, to make it seem a bit bigger, but yeah, it's cool. Just a way to get some more information on the world, hints at certain things, and makes the game feel a little less lonely, even though your friends in that case are stinking rats. But still cool.
Before we get away from semblance, I have
Sure.
a question about a specific interaction, and I'm curious if you guys what direction you guys went, because now I'm assuming semblance is an option. Maybe, or potential option. Getting into, I think it's during Follow the Ink, you're trying to get into the eyeless bar, right? And there is some options to figure out how to get in there, I'm assuming. Can you just use semblance as a way to convince the guy to let you in? Or do you have to get the tattoo?
I did the tattoo.
I did the tattoo as well.
Okay. I guess I'd already done that, but I guarantee you could, just pose as an eyeless, or there's probably other characters who maybe have that tagged on them that they can enter that bar. They have the right to, and yeah, I guarantee you that would work. That would be cool.
One of my
That's
favorite
smart.
interactions in this game. I didn't want us to get too far away from it. So. But, yeah.
Well, yeah, I know there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with, like, one of them I think you can, because I think in like Shan's mansion, right, it's like his lock on his vault is because of his voice or something like that, or like
it's music.
It's like, yeah, you need like an audiograph, and you have to play the right song.
You need an audiograph. I think there's like an interaction where you can like steal his face and then like sing into the microphone as like with his voice, right? And then it does some like special thing as well. So yeah, it seems like that seems pretty interesting, of the way you can pose as the named characters, and way special interactions would pop up because of that is pretty cool.
I'm excited to do the Mission Plus now, and like just the specific interactions that I know have totally different routes. I'm excited to go back through those this way. Very sick. All right, rats.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much more to say on it beyond like, yeah, it's cool. You get some little hints here and there, and whatnot. And the voice is funny, and of course, they're rats, so they like talk in kind of a weird, cryptic way, right? And they don't like say, they just don't write sentence. They just say something kind of strange. But it feels like almost a continuation of the way the Heart, you get hints on certain things about the world, and through like this kind of ghostly voice. So I like that they kind of kept that system in there in some way, but it was obviously quite a bit different than the way it's been in the previous games.
When she first pulled out like I think it's called like the rat totem or something, I forget the name for it, but when she first pulled it out, I'm like, of course this character gets a heart too, but it wasn't the heart, it was something different, and it wasn't given to her by the outsider, it was given to her by Deidre, which is an interesting like gift,
right?
But I loved it, especially like I feel like my first couple interactions with the rats, I was like constantly just using it on them, like hearing their thoughts, and they do give like it's kind of when you eavesdrop like slightly, like sometimes they give you useful information, but most of the time it's just rat jibber jabber, and I really liked it because rats have been around since the inception of this universe. So it's cool to kind of hear their thoughts on it, because although they're pretty simple minded, they definitely still have some words to share.
Yeah.
I did get a kick out of their voice though. It was just this like little like a little child or something, like the voice that they had for it.
Yeah. It's like an adult who's pretending to be a child. It's like specifically kind of weird. So talking about some of the, I guess we've talked through the abilities, some of the other just common abilities. We talked about like once you get the sword, the twin blade, how it has the wind blast essentially just thrown on, which was super fun. Like I really enjoyed using that. The hook mines are to me the highlight of the new equipment here, where like non-lethal and just the ragdollness of it, or the lethal version where it just rips bodies apart. Was also amazing. It's just disgusting, and I absolutely loved it. It was so much fun.
The first time I used it, I ripped a guy in half.
I know you don't expect it to, right? You think it's just gonna like knock him out or something, but like no, it shreds them.
I was like trying to hide the body, and I picked him up, and I have like his upper half, but I thought it was his whole body. I tossed it. I'm like, hey, where's his legs? And then I let it go back, and I just see his legs like in the middle of the street. I'm like, oh, let's hide these.
Yeah. So good.
Dumpster, that one goes over here.
Yeah, hide them all over the city. I forgot too, because once again I played Dishonored 2 and this most recent playthrough non-lethal, and so I kind of forgot about some of the brutality of the game in terms of like ripping bodies apart and all of the limbs and stuff like that. And like that game is just as brutal as this, but I kind of forgot about it. But yeah, playing as Billy and being cutthroat and just destroying everyone and using these abilities to the max. Man, like it is intense and satisfying, and like M-rated as fuck. It is great. I forgot about some of that stuff. They also, once again, we talked about this, how like Dowd has like a different, like he doesn't have the crossbow. He has like his little wrist rocket thing. I like that they gave Billy kind of once again a slightly different version, the voltaic gun, which once again has like those same abilities that you're used to, a couple different things. But I like the visuals of it, and I forget where you get this. I think is it a bone charm? I forget where you get it, but the ability to like scavenge ammo for it from just like the world. Did you guys get that? Like, I think it's a bone charm.
I think that was a bone charm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it might be a bone charm.
I definitely got it.
Did not use that.
It's really cool. It's like you just like pick up pens and like screws and nails and stuff from around the world.
Or
yeah.
No, I think it might be one of the equipment upgrades.
Oh, it's probably that. I think it's that. I think it is like from the black market. Yeah.
Yeah, because you start to like pick up pencils and shit.
Yeah, exactly. Which is really cool. I just love that detail. That feels very like Fallout to me. Yeah. But yeah, what is anything else? Any highlights from the combat? Because I feel like it's a lot of the same, but just like a slightly different here or there. The hook mine is the big new exciting one. But other than that, it does feel like similar to what we've played before. But it just feels great. New enemy types. We can talk about those in a minute. But yeah, anything else with like specifically the power set, or Dante, even like with the original game plus, is there any interactions or interesting stuff that you came upon with using those upgrades again, or those Dishonored 2 powers?
Yeah, I got a style, man. I just like dash in, dash out. Like sometimes I'll leave some mines around, so that's kind of how I was using the hook mines in that capacity. I would literally just like sneak up behind somebody, put a hook mine down, and then dash back and just kind of watch it happen. And it was always like incredibly entertaining. I was going pretty non-lethal as well, so I was using the thing that made it so the hook mines suspended them in, and like I said earlier, suspended them in the air and then like silences them as well. So it was just this really fantastic thing, just having all these people just like swimming in the air, kind of as I was just teleporting all over the place. But yeah, it's a pretty limited kind of group of items or group of skills. Once again, I'd say the main thing I did was like domino, headshot.
Yeah,
like
that's a classic.
That was definitely but it's once again, it's not too different from what you would do if you were playing Dishonored 2.
So I got a question for that, because if you domino a bunch of people and then you hook mine like one of them, are they just all gonna like get dismembered the exact same way?
Yeah, so I did the non-lethal one though, so it would it would only suspend the one.
I gotta try now.
But yeah, now once again, I need to go for more.
The other people would get knocked unconscious though, I guess, right? In that situation,
I guess so. Yeah,
they would just go down.
That's funny.
So yeah, pretty. Like the interactions don't seem like they go as far because I don't think they were built around them the same way. But you still get to do plenty of fun things with those combinations.
In Mission Plus, whatever that mode's called, Could you domino someone and then face steal and then steal like all these people's faces at the same time?
You're like a Hydra. You just have so many heads.
I wonder how they work out the logic for that. Like, I assume maybe they would just get knocked unconscious, but it'd be funny if like all of their faces got removed at the same time.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking about like just domino in conjunction with a lot of these other skills, and it sounds like that would be the combo. That would be like the
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like once again, domino and then displace into someone, and like would they all
Oh.
explode? That would
Fireworks.
that would be frame rate dropper right there, supreme. Like I would crash my game. I'm sure if I did that. I'll have to try out some of these interactions.
Yeah, seriously, like Mission Plus sounds like the way.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of jealous I didn't just go straight for that.
Yeah. Maybe we'll go in then and talk about some of these individual levels. We've talked about Sirius. Let's keep going with that one. But I think to me this is like got to be one of the best Dishonored levels, and I think part of that is because you are seeing it at 2 different times a day. Obviously, that adds a lot of flavor to it of just seeing it and interacting with it in these 2 different ways and seeing your like the actions you chose and how it directly affects those things. But once again, I feel like this is when the game opens up in that way, and there is contracts in that first mission, but the fact that you like go to the black market, there's some postings on the board there, the world building element of it I think is great, and then those contracts too, I think that's a good way for them to add really difficult situations into the game, and it being like fully optional means that not everyone has to interact with it. But like Kirkland, I'm curious because there's one of those postings is to take out the barkeep, like the bartender at the Spectre Club, where you have to like remove his body and like place it, I think, up on the roof. Is that the one? And like I was looking around for so long, I'm like, how could you do this non-lethally? And then eventually I ended up killing literally everyone to do it. But like I'm wondering if there's a special interaction, or did you even try to do that in a non-lethal way?
I spent like 5 or 10 minutes trying to theory craft on how I was gonna do that, and it just, I was like, no, on another playthrough I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna leave this one. Up until that point though, like I was crushing it with the contracts. I'm like, yeah, I'm really gonna commit and get them all done. But that one, yeah, I like, because how, like, I feel like you would have to get him out of there initially, like somehow, because he is just in the middle of a shark tank essentially. He's right at the bar, just the bar, I guess, the bar table, and then just people all around him. So I have no idea, but
I wonder
that's
if
what you did. You just popped off, killed everyone.
Yeah, I killed literally every single person. I wonder if you could like maybe talk to him with a certain character and be like, "Hey, come into this room" or something like that. I wonder if that's what you're supposed to do, but yeah, I could not figure out how to do that without just massacring everyone. Which I felt like, fuck the eyeless. I am gonna kill everyone in here. And I'm okay with it.
I thought about like Googling a walkthrough or something for the non-lethal, because I know somebody's done that, but I'm like, no, this could be pretty fun actually to like figure out
a little
on
puzzle.
Your own, so.
I think there's a way to get everyone to leave the bar.
Ooh, maybe in like, put some foul thing in the air or something like that.
There's a way to get everyone to leave the bar.
And he stays maybe.
No, he just leaves too, and you go.
Oh, okay. You would find him in a new spot.
I swear that's the route.
I mean, I guess if you threw a grenade in there, everyone probably runs away.
Well, that's the thing. So that's what the other reason why I'm pretty sure that you can get everyone to leave is because I didn't read that very well and I just killed him. And then everybody does leave.
Yeah, right. Everyone's
so I'm like,
freaked out.
There has to be an interaction that causes like a non-lethal interaction that causes everybody to just bounce, and I wouldn't be surprised it's like higher up on the level, like
You know what? I guess with
over an intercom or something like that.
I guess a great way to do that sequence would just be with Domino, right? If you could link 4 people, how many is it 3 or 4 that you can link?
4.
Yeah, so if you link 4, you could link half the people in that room, hit them with a stun bolt, and then like Domino a couple other ones and stun. Like you could probably do it that way actually, but yeah, I'm trying to think with Billy's base moveset how you do that would be pretty fucking hard.
Doing it stealthy, probably like nigh impossible.
Yeah, I guess you could.
Doing it non-lethally, I think there's definitely a way.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
To your point though, Dylan, like I do actually really appreciate that they made those, like at least some of them, like pretty challenging and not like very clear on like how to do them, because I feel like especially on the other games, by the time you're like going for your final target, it says like do this or do this, and this is the lethal way, or the lethal way is just straight up kill them nice and easy, but then go grab this item and then that's the non-lethal route. But for those contracts, like it doesn't really have that, so it kind of forces you to really really think more so than maybe you'd have to on other targets. And that's something that, like, although game's not very long, like you could probably spend equal amounts of time playing it, trying to like really master those bounties and contracts, and like definitely like by the later portions of this game I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna finish it. I'm gonna worry about some of these other side things on a next playthrough, which is great because it gives more replayability for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I was gonna say that too. That it's like there was definitely a few I could not figure out, and yeah, for the sake of playing through this game like for the first time fully, I didn't want to use any walkthroughs to like figure out some of those things. But okay, this might just be me being dumb, but like I could not figure out where you're supposed to kill the mime to get that contract complete. Like where the like suicide cliff is what they call it, right? You're supposed to like throw him off that cliff, right? Did you guys complete that one?
Right? I just killed him. Once again.
But I think to get the contract, you have to kill him because you're supposed to make it look like an accident, right? Like he committed suicide.
A lot of those I just killed him and hoped for the best. I went back to the place and I was like, this wasn't as much money as I was expecting.
Yeah, you didn't complete it. That's funny.
Yeah, you must have to like.
Just killed the mime.
It must be like a resemblance thing where maybe you can like be someone that would interact with him to get him to move. Because that's one where I found him, but I didn't know how to get him to that location or anything.
Yeah, I just knocked out because there's two people like watching him, and I was able to. Well, I mean, I was killing a lot of people, so I killed a couple guards, and then I was able to narrow it down. But then I like quick saved and threw that mime off so many cliffs, and I could not figure out which one. And I had all the like quest marker things turned off, so maybe it just shows you. I'm sure it does just show you where you're supposed to do it. But I had all that stuff. At least for the first playthrough of Dishonored, I like to turn those things off and play with like very minimal HUD and whatnot. But yeah, there's so many great interactions here, like going and getting that tattoo. I think is a fun little mini side quest, which of course you don't have to do. You can even get into the Spectre Club through Shan's house, right? You can go like all the way through his house, and there's like a connection. He has a secret doorway to get in there, so that's like a cool way to do that. Getting into the black market was a pretty tricky thing to do, but I eventually figured out how to do that. And I feel bad because I like the shopkeeper, but like I wanted to just mess around with the game, so I eventually figured out how to get in there and take them out and steal all their stuff. So that was a cool way to do it as well. Dante.
I'm excited to get in there. I did not.
Mime. Sorry, do you want to know or not?
Sure. No. Yeah. What's up?
It's way simpler than I think any of us were giving it credit for. You just have to knock them out and then bring them around to the cliff. And the cliff is where that elevator is. There's like a scaffolding elevator over to the right of the bank.
Oh, way over there. Okay, that's tricky then, because that's actually that's through a lot of guards to get there.
Yeah. You have to bring them all the way around and then throw them off.
I thought it was like just down that little river bank there, and like throw them off that cliff. But yeah, okay, that's interesting.
There's even like a I remember seeing the indicator for it, and it being like Dead Man's Bluff.
Oh, okay.
Dead Man's Bluff, and it's just like
right.
I don't know what the hell they're referring to, but it was because I once again was not reading my contracts far.
That's funny.
I was just capping everybody I could possibly.
That's great though, man. Like think about all the just places back and forth you have to go through that level if you want to complete everything. Like that is a whole that's a whole mission in and of itself, is taking that guy's body through all there without, if you're trying to do it without all the guards being dead. And once again, like taking the barkeeper and getting him up on top of that roof is like a whole endeavor. Like it's really great, just the ways it's kind of incentivizing you to zigzag back and forth through that level. And I think that's why it's so memorable to me now, is I feel like I learned every balcony, every ledge, and every building you can go through to sneak around and stuff. Because even if I'm playing lethally, I still can't fight 100 guards at once, and I'm trying to do it smartly and not just be a total buffoon. So really, really just well-designed level, man. So great.
And that's a very Deathloop thing, right? Like backtracking areas, zigzagging all around, really like finding every nook and cranny on the one level, because you're looping through it. You're going through it every single day.
Yeah.
Great reasoning to check every nook and cranny, because you don't get the runes, right? Like that was my incentive in the previous ones, but now if you're really following through with the contracts, you do have to interact with a lot of those areas. So maybe they definitely found their way to make it find a good balance despite taking those out, I guess.
Yeah, and then once again, I mentioned this earlier, but I like having two targets in this level, and obviously there's multiple ways you can dispatch of both of them, and I really liked that. I think it's a bit of a bummer that Shan's house is like through a loading screen, so that's like, it feels a little bit disconnected in that way, but the rest of the level being one huge area is pretty cool. Even like the ability to go inside the bank, and during the day you can't get through any of those like heavily locked doors and whatnot. But yeah, just the fact that that's like hinting at what you're going to be doing when you go back there in the evening is really great. I like that weird little encounter with the shopkeeper who has like all the blood flies in her basement, and she has like a prisoner down there, and she's doing some weird experiments. There's a body, and if you like go outside, you can see like where the window is. He like was throwing all these like notes out the window, and they were rolling down the river and like bunching up out there, and that's like a little hint if you hadn't gone in there. But that was really cool, and I definitely like knocked her out and threw her in that nest with the blood flies. I'm like, you deserve to die, you're a bad person. And then I got him out of there. But then he was really mad when I killed the mime, and he's like, oh, he like runs away and all this stuff. But that was a fun little mini side quest as well. So yeah, I had a great time with that particular level. And once again, going through it twice and seeing the different version of it, daytime, nighttime, is really cool.
Yeah, it was. I agree. That's probably my highlight level for this game, and going back again through and like just finding like the vault. I feel like the way that the vault was of just like this big elevator thing, like going through the bank. It's an aspect I hadn't seen on like a bank vault before, and yeah, I mean, we mentioned it so many times on this retro. I just love when games like make you backtrack through a level again, and you just. Especially if the level is well designed, it's if it's well designed, it just makes it really fun going through it. And then maybe if you miss like a particular ledge or route to go on the first time around, it's like, oh man, it's like a whole new level again. So yeah. I loved it.
Yeah, for sure the highlight. Specifically, my favorite contract is in this one as well. I guess majority of the contracts are in this one, but the fact that you have to go into the bank and get the guy, I forget who exactly you're grabbing, but you have to take him all the way up from the top level and bring him all the way down to the bottom level and put him in that chair non-lethally, and then also take out every single sister and brother inside of the bank. It ends up being this just like, I don't know, this just super massacre.
Wait, are you thinking of the conservatory here, or
I
are you?
am thinking of the conservatory.
I was gonna say, I'm like sister and brother.
Which level is this then?
Well, I'm just talking about like the streets
archive.
of.
I'm thinking of the Stolen Archive, which is the one following.
Yes, yeah.
Might be, man. I'm all over the place today.
It's all good. You got a lot going on. You're going on a trip tomorrow across the sea, so you got a lot on your mind. It's all good.
But yeah, no, I'm just jumping ahead a little bit. I was getting the layout of the bank and the layout of the Stolen Archive kind of like.
Yeah. Well, yeah. The
threads there a little bit.
The bank, obviously, yeah. So that's kind of like hinted at in the first time you go to that location, and then the second time you go through, you actually are trying to find a way in. And of course, you can go through the front door, or you can go through like the service hatch. I think you go like down through, or I went through the like rooftop of it, and you can like put some like poison, I guess, in the air vent system and knocks everyone out. So that was actually pretty easy for the most part. To go through that until obviously you're like actually in the bank vault area, but getting through the outside of the bank, like the front facing, like client facing, I guess, part was a bit easier. But I liked that that section too. I mean, the bank vault, of course, being a Jindosh creation, of course, it's going to be just weird and extra and just, you know, only he could create such a very bizarre thing. And there's even notes where he's like, oh yeah, this will be functional for hundreds of years, better than any bank, the other vault that anyone else has ever created. So I like this level as well. It's hard to, differentiate them because it's like the bank job, like it's definitely related to what you're doing outside before you even go in. So it feels like kind of two levels in one, and maybe one just big level. It's interesting the way they've switched up the level structure of this thing too. But another Jindosh riddle because of this too. Did you guys, instead of like being a logic, well, I guess it is still a logic puzzle, but instead of kind of being a word-based one, it's more, it's like a mathematical riddle instead. Did you guys take the time to figure it out, or did you find another way to get into the vault?
I did the riddle, yeah.
Nice.
I was pleasantly surprised to get another Jindosh riddle, because that character's great.
Dante, do you remember? There's you can definitely do it without having to figure out the riddle.
Yeah,
Similar how
I got
Kraken Slab.
You get a key from Michael, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I had the key, but when I got there, I just wanted to figure it out anyway.
I was just like, let's get in this. It's time to do a robbery.
Get the sword. Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely got the key. I want I want to go back through and do a lot of these like puzzles I missed. I definitely, like I said, when I got into this one, it was like, oh man, I played a lot of Dishonored, and I was kind of like feeling like path of least resistance was the way that I was going for
that's
most
totally
of it,
fair.
So.
Yeah, different for us since we're playing through for the first time. I think we wanted to stretch out to see how far, how much you could do with this thing. But I was pretty happy that I could figure out that riddle because I'm not a big math guy, and the fact that it was like a number-based riddle took me a bit. But I like on my sheet of paper here, I was scratching out all sorts of things, and it looked like a crazy person. But I'm wondering. Kirkland, if it's the same, because the riddle in Dishonored 2 has names and like words switched out so that it's different for every run.
Yeah.
Do you like, because it's like the previous two numbers, you add those, right, and then you put that new number that equals there, and then like the tricky part of the riddle for me, sorry Dante, the slight spoilers, you'll probably forget when you're actually going through the riddle, is that like one of the vaults doesn't have a key code that you're punching into it, but then the key code, like the numbers that should be there are still part of what the full riddle is, right? So you have to still account for those numbers even though you're not punching them in. And that was the part that tripped me up. I'm like, okay, well, obviously that one I don't do the numbers and I go right on to the next one. So it took me a bit to figure out, like, that was the kind of crux of the puzzle, is that you still have to figure out what those numbers are supposed to be in that slot.
That was the same layout for me as well. I'm just curious if like the actual numbers were different, because I know in Dishonored 2 they kind of added that for like the vaults. I think the numbers were kind of becoming unique to the run, whereas in Dishonored 1,
I have my sheet of paper, so
oh shit, there you go.
The numbers for me were 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. That was like the that was the hint I was given.
Yeah,
okay,
I think mine were different from that. So, which is nice, because then you
that.
actually have to do the riddle. You can't just Google what the answer is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't have a paper to reference, unfortunately.
Yeah, and then the other possibility is that if you, I guess, haven't got those keys or didn't do the riddle, you can just fuck up the brakes on the vault, and then it will crash down. And then I guess I'm presuming it opens at that point. Or otherwise, I don't know why they would hint so much about these brakes, because that's like Jin Joss is like, yeah, the one for some reason, the whatever, you hit the brakes at the top of it, and I saw them, but I'm like, I want to figure out this riddle. But it's cool that once again, there's like, I guess 3 separate ways, maybe even more, that you could get into those vaults. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, the key situation is you get Jacoby's and Sean Yoon's keys in the previous level.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to do some setup in the previous level, and then once you get both of those keys, when you get into the bank itself, there's like one additional vault key that
right
one of the guys has, and then you can just literally like just open both keys and the safe opens.
So I guess no matter what, you'd have to get both the keys from those two guys in the previous level to like complete that level, right? You don't have to kill them or anything, but you just have to get those keys.
Yeah.
But then there's that third optional one, and that's where if you don't have that, you could do the riddle or the brakes instead to get inside.
Yeah. So I was wondering, I was like, man, like I didn't realize there was like this math equation, because I just ran up to some keyholes and I just walked in. I was like, ooh, a sword.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love too that somewhere in the bank there was a vault for Duke Luca Abel. And he had his janky painting in there, which I don't think we mentioned on the Dishonored 2 review, but the fact that he's just such an awful painter, and he did like a self-portrait that is just absolutely disgusting, and it's like almost like a meme. It looks like a meme format kind of picture, and I love that popped up again. It was just like in this vault. That was a good little touch. I really liked that.
Like seeing it again, I was like, man, this guy's really like trying to, I don't know, make a living off of this shit, and it was horrific.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, I like, too, that even, once again, that kind of trick you can do of putting the laudanum, is what it is, into, like, the air duct system to knock out all the people. Like, there's even multiple ways you can do that, where you can just straight up buy it from the black market for, like, I think it's, like, 900 coins. Like, it's pretty expensive. Or you can win the auction and do it that way. And then I guess you could also steal it from the black market, and maybe you can also steal it from the auction in some way as well. So I think that's pretty cool there's like multiple ways you can do that solution as well. And then I guess, maybe another good touch about the bank vault is that they brought back the Clockwork Soldiers, but these were like the prototype ones. These were like the ones you're seeing in Dishonored 2. So I feel like they fight pretty much identically, but they just look a bit different, and maybe they have some other mechanics. I fought them, but I couldn't figure out if there was any mechanical differences, but I thought it was cool that you at least get to see like a slightly different version of them. That was pretty interesting. And once again, just any connection to Dishonored 2, because obviously we're still in Karnaca, and just the fact that we're building up that world that was already so well developed, even more. It's like, man, Karnaca has got to be just one of the best video game worlds of all time. It's not an open world, but just the amount of it that you see, the amount of lore, the amount of world building. I just love Karnaca so much.
They're the part that make one of the challenges in that level the hardest. I think I'm on the correct challenge this time, because you do have the ability to knock everyone out, so you get to like move through the level pretty easily as long as you're moving quietly. This was the first time I ran into.
Yeah, you can still wake them up pretty easily, right?
Up, and I was like, God,
yeah.
But one of the challenges or one of the contracts is to get through and do that whole thing without anybody seeing you, and
that's crazy. Yeah,
incredibly simple to get through 90% of that place, and then the second you get down into the vault area, you start to see Jindosh's robots, and you're like, well, they're still up, and they're like moving around, and they start to wake people up as well.
Oh, okay.
So that starts to make that part it increases the difficulty like as you move through that space. But yeah, like once again, the contracts being a really, really cool little additional challenge for even the levels that you're already going to interact with no matter what for the goal. It's like, okay, here's an added like mission within the mission to just change how you're gonna path through it.
Right.
Yeah, definitely pissed to see those robots at the bottom of that thing.
Yeah.
I was pumped to see like that version of them, because obviously in Dishonored 2 it's like the more advanced version. But I remember like the Dishonored 2, I think it's like the E3 cinematic. They had like that version with like the smile, and they're like so creepy looking. So I was a little bit disappointed I didn't see them in Dishonored 2. So it was cool to get them here. They just when they add like a little bit of a human feature, they just look a little bit more sinister, especially like that smile that they got.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And there's even like another side quest you can do where you can figure out like a phrase that Jindosh had created, and then like repeat that phrase back to the soldiers, and they like switch to your side, and then you can get them as like allies. So of course that's cool too. I think you could rewire them in Dishonored 2, and maybe you can rewire these ones as well. But that's just cool that once again they just give you so many ways to play through experience this thing 100 different times over and over again. Another level. So, I mean, the first one might be a quick mention, the Albarca Baths. It's the smallest level out of all of them, and you don't have your powers yet. Even on New Game Plus, you don't have your powers in that level, which I thought was kind of an interesting choice. Original Game Plus, whatever you want to call it. So, yeah, I think it's a solid level. I like the hook of it. Are you trying to recover Dowd? Obviously, that's a great incentive as us from big Dishonored 1 fans. And I think the level is well designed. It's great. It's a lot of fun. There's contracts in there, but it is pretty short. So I don't know if I have too much more to add on it, but I still like it.
Yeah, just interacting with Dowd down there, chained up under the boxing ring. I think it's just such I don't know. It's a cool visual for sure. But yeah, I'm with you. It's pretty short and sweet.
Yeah. Every Dishonored game has like the intro level where you don't have like your powers, and this one definitely. I think it's one of the better ones actually, because it is I think definitely longer than Corvo's, because you're just kind of going into the Empress, and then that's it. Emily's, oh my gosh, apologies there.
Before we go see what is it? Emily's mom.
Yeah,
Jessamine.
Jessamine.
So like I did like just that aspect of it, and just to see like Dowd pop off like once you turn off the chair, that was really awesome. It's pretty similar to when Corvo does it at the very beginning of Dishonored 2, and it's a great visual of being like, man, that's what I look like when I'm popping off. That's sweet.
Yeah, definitely. Let's take our next break, and we'll be right back. Okay, so Dante, you were talking about how in the Stolen Archive it had your favorite side quest. You want to talk more about that level?
Yeah. So jumped the gun there a little bit, but by far my favorite one, because I was just going on just slaughter mode once again. Definitely was enjoying kind of a more high chaos playthrough, and obviously the bank made me go very, very quiet because I wanted to finish that contract. This one. Your pretty much only goal is to make sure you do not kill one person and get rid of everybody else. So you end up having to dig through like every nook and cranny of this stolen archive because people are in such like weird little spots throughout this place that I felt like it was just this absolute blast being able to find different ways to interact with this space to make people go to specific places and make sure that they kind of were like maybe congregating in specific spots. Like there's this this microphone in on like the second level of this like 4-story, 5-story place, and you pretty much can like call all the sisters and brothers to congregate over in a particular area and just start destroying people. It ended up just being like a blast, and once again another opportunity for those contracts to make me interact with this in a way that I probably wouldn't have. I probably would have killed people who were in my way and then got to my ultimate goal, but instead it was just like, nope, this is just the most murderous intent I think I've experienced in this series.
Yeah, that was a really fun contract to get as well. I agree with you there. And then just the new enemy type of the oracular sisters I thought were really cool. They kind of had a creepiness to them as well, but their power set was particularly interesting, and like challenging area, right? Because tons of overseers, tons of the sisters, and that just made for what was like a pretty difficult combat sequence when you're especially supposed to kill all of them. And without Domino, like some of those sequences where it's like, man, there's like 8 enemies here, and to have to fight all of them individually is pretty tricky. Obviously, I set up a bunch of traps and stuff like that, but you only have so many hook mines at your disposal in this game. So I think for me, like, this level is definitely a standout. I think for some people, they might be like, oh, they just reused the level from Dishonored 2, the fucking lazy bastards. Like, I paid for a new game here, I want full new levels. But I love being able to revisit what was maybe my potentially least favorite level of that game. We talked about that, and visually I loved it, but I just felt like mechanically and like narratively just wasn't the most gripping. And so I love that we got to visit in a way that feels kind of crack in the slabby. You don't have the timepiece, you're not seeing these changes in real time, but to come back, whatever it is, months or maybe a couple years later, and see the overseers taking over this place, like kind of condemning it, blocking off certain areas. They have all of their kind of evidence tape and like little, numbers, 3, 5, all this different stuff that they're setting up everywhere. See all these new people move in. And then even the streets outside and how kind of devastating that place is. And there's that one place that's just loaded with traps and stuff like that. That was like loaded with blood flies, I think, in Dishonored 2. And just, seeing those different interactions outside and some of those places that have now changed in the time since. I really enjoyed going back to that area, and more than I expected. Now it's like, oh, I feel like this is one of my favorite Dishonored levels now because I've seen it in these 2 different versions. And yes, they're 2 different levels from 2 different games, but in my mind, I can kind of bundle it into one in the way Crack and Slab has different versions to it, or Upper Syria even. So I really, really enjoyed getting to go through this place again. And it's like, man, that's cool that they took maybe my lowest from Dishonored 2, and now it's like another just all-time great Dishonored level. It's really cool.
There's also a name. I know we've talked about Arkane's just like having some of the best names in video games, and the guy who steals the document you're trying to get in that, his name is Eleuterio Cienfuego.
Oh, so good.
It's a powerful name.
Yeah,
love it.
Amazing.
Put that on the list for our ranking best names.
Yeah, I really like this level too. I really like just seeing like the different version of like the overseer type with the what are they called, Dylan? You just said it, the oraculous sister.
The oracular sisters, yeah.
Yeah, like they're kind of like the complete opposite of like the Brigmore witches to an extent. And I feel like overseers, I always liked them in the universe, just kind of being this counter to the Outsider's influence, but like they're very generic. Like everyone kind of looks the exact same with their helmet, and they're just like the tyrannical, or it's the kind of like a tyrant, like the more like extreme side of the spectrum of like countering just that heresy, I guess, for lack of a better term, but just having like the different character type, it definitely brought fresh life to it. And it's like, okay, like this order is more it's got more to it than kind of what I initially thought with just the overseers, which the overseers are cool, but just like if I would have just had them again here, like I feel like they would have just been very forgettable. And although like the level would have been really fun, I think just having like that new character, new enemy type just made it feel a little bit fresh. Similar how like the Brigmore Witches added just some new new breath to
Yeah.
just tackling those.
That's a big part of it. Where like Dishonored in the original game, you play as a man, in the DLC you play as a different man, and then all the guards in the game are men. And that was like just a great change with Dishonored 2. Is like here you can play as a woman if you want, and
Yeah.
now like a bunch of the guards, maybe half of them, I don't even know what the number is, are women. Like they just added that like variety in there. Which I think is great, and I think it's cool. Like, what would the overseers, like women equivalent of what the overseer is, be? And they came up with just like a really cool new enemy type, and it's pretty awesome.
I think it's necessary, right? Like, it's one of those things. Like, I think they found the need for it in the DLC for the first game, when you start dealing with Doubt's assassins a lot more, and you start obviously the witches in the second game, or obviously like you deal with them way more, but like once again, I think they had to find some ways to get out of some fatigue, or find ways to make people deal with things in different ways, because like I think you can fall right into the trap that I have I have a tendency to do. It's like, oh, I have my play style, I'm just gonna play with my play style. But, you run into these new enemy types, and they're just like, oh, I have to think about the way that I'm doing these things, because they're going to interact with these skills and powers and all these things in different ways. So smart on them for sure.
Even like the eyeless and the cultists, like they're just once again humanoids that use a variety of equipment and stuff like that. But I think they did a good way of here, just throw it like even just visually, you have a bit more variety in the basic enemy types that you're fighting, the kind of the quote unquote goons of the game. And then moving into the last level in the game, A Hole in the World, which takes place at the Shindere. I don't know if a character ever pronounced it, so I don't know how to pronounce that correctly. But the quarry, and then you're going into the void as well. But yeah, I love this as like I guess especially from my perspective of back in 2017 playing through the first level and then like a bit of the second level. I don't even think I got into the bank officially. I think I dipped out even before that. And going through and like not expecting, like I had no idea that the Royal Conservatory was used again, and that was such an exciting thing for me. Even after all these years, it has not been spoiled. And then like going to this location, because always to me Dishonored 2 and that fucking mountain, that rock is so iconic. It's so beautiful, and the fact that you're going up there and you get to like have a level up there was amazing. That was such a great surprise for me, and I really liked that. The first, like that level's very long, and I thought it seemed like it was going to be a shorter section, but then it just like kept going. I love that it starts with almost a Last of Us-y sort of thing, where it's like this overgrown, abandoned structures in the beginning. There's a couple dogs, but for the most part, like the first couple areas, there's no enemies at all. And then you come upon the cultists and what they're doing there as you get deeper inside of the mountains, and like just the structures inside the quarry are so interesting. Where like they have these like elaborate libraries and stuff, and like they're just building as like in terms of necessity, like where they can fit things, where there's room between the rocks, and then you're sometimes scaling between different cave systems back into the man-made structures, and then obviously into the void section as well. I thought it was such a departure from the rest of just Dishonored 1 and 2. I felt like it was a bit Deathloopy once again in that kind of way, with these like harsh rock structures and stuff like that, and the way like Freestad Rock in Deathloop, the way that all those buildings are just built on the edges of cliffs and in very bizarre places. It kind of gave me a bit of that vibe too. So just such a delight, very surprised. And I think for me too, Dishonored, we talked about this, Dishonored 2 specifically, that last level kind of not really a great finale for any of us, even though it's a return to Dunwall, just wasn't our favorite in the game. But I think like Upper Syria, hard to debate against that when you experience it in two different ways. You kind of do with this level as well, but to me it was like that was a fantastic finale. And now that this is the third Dishonored game, being maybe the potential last ever Dishonored level, great way to close it out. Really, really exceptional level.
It does a very cool thing that a Crack in the Slab does, where it's just like, okay, let me interact with this exact same space, but with a totally different atmosphere, like vibe. Also, once again, just seeing so much of the void, and then really being able to just like be inside of it and maneuver within it. I think it's like one of the coolest aesthetics ever, and just being able to like spend more time in that, I thought was amazing. We see some of the weirdest enemies in this entire franchise are in this space, and then just like seeing how much people are like investing into the mysteries that have been just kind of like looming throughout the entire series. It's just like, oh, it's not just like you and a couple other people are aware of the outsider and are interacting with the outsider. It's like, oh my god, there's like entire groups of people devoted to this, and they're like researching this regularly. And I just thought it was like, it expanded upon what I thought might have been just like independent for just those few people, right? That we've seen have interactions with the outsider. It's like, oh no, there's so much more to this.
Yeah.
And that makes so much sense though for like what
Yeah.
what the outsider is. Like it's they don't say he's like the devil. It's just but like it's everybody kind of knows of the outsider whether they believe in it or not. Like they've heard that term, and yeah, like this actually interacting with like a group that's just so dedicated to like just being like following that, like with the cultist idea, like it totally makes sense. And I feel like until I was interacting with them, I'm like, yeah, why wasn't this like it? Why wasn't this implemented earlier on? But you know, you kind of have to lay the groundwork. And the first Dishonored game, it's not about the outsider's story. It's about Corvo's story and like where we are now with the Death of the Outsider. Like it really fit to have like this standalone game to be this kind of tackling of that stuff. And yeah, I loved it too. I love just kind of like the descent into the void, because yeah, you just slowly get there, and then you get to, I forget what it was called. It's like that big red eye thing, and then like once you interact with that, like just man, you're opening up the gates of the void.
That thing was
Right
cool.
here. It's right
Yeah.
in front of you. Right in the eye of the dead god. That's the thing.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I loved all of that. I think in the very, very end, like when you actually find Dowd and yeah, I guess the outsider, I maybe wanted it to be like a little bit more what, I don't even know what I wanted. Like
I mean, there's no final boss fight, right? I guess that's an element to it. Yeah.
That's the thing, but like maybe more area I have to like investigate. Like it just
Sure.
kind of seemed condensed, but also like you are kind of at the heart of the void, so what more do I really want? Like the void is nothingness, and that's kind of what it was, so it is fitting there. But I definitely wasn't disappointed by like the overall just descending to it. Like you mentioned, Dylan, like it's really cool to finally be able to go like to that rock that just looked so interesting in the second game, or at least that's when it was first shown. So yeah, I really like this finale, and if this is like the last interaction that we have with the Dishonored world, I think it is very fitting. And something too that this game did a good job at, I kind of mentioned earlier, is just investigating more into just the influence of the outsider, but also just like his origin. Like I feel like that's something in the early games I never really asked about and didn't really need to know, but I'm not really disappointed with like the explanation of it. I don't think it's the greatest like reasoning ever. It's not the most original. They just had this like kid or something that was just like sacrificed and turned into the outsider. It's like, okay, that is kind of cool, but it doesn't bring down the enjoyment of the outsider by any means. Although my favorite interpretation of the character was in the first game, just for the big question mark that he was. Right. It is nice that like knowing that it took a big dip for me, like the overall outsider in the second game. I was still happy with this, and that's something that I think I was a little bit concerned about, because I really didn't care about the outsider from the second game. As you guys remember, I was like skipping the cutscenes with him. I was like, screw this guy, but I was still able to kind of grasp on to just his story, and yeah, I think it was a good finale for sure.
So that makes me curious, like how you interacted with him, because they're really like another one of my like probably one of my favorite Dishonored puzzles is leading up to how you interact with him in this level. So I'm curious, like what you did with him. Like, did you kind of go up and just give him the knife, or?
I was getting too invested with the like my play style and just the satisfying story of Billy being able to just accept what's going on and look at the outsider as more of a tragic character. So yeah, I saved him, but next playthrough he's right. Meeting my blade.
Nice.
I definitely dropped a quick save and then saw both endings.
Okay.
It almost like a Dark Messiah kind of way. I was like, yeah, I guess I can kind of just see the different endings with a quick decision rather than having to play through the whole game again and make all these decisions along the way to get to this final conclusion. But I think I like that version better, Kirkland, that one where you kind of have sympathy for him and bring him back into the real world. Like seeing his eyes go back to normal, it's like, oh yeah, he's had fucked up eyes the whole time. Totally forgot about that. You like totally do like kind of forget about that. But yeah, for me, he was definitely not quite on the level of Dishonored 1, but definitely an improvement from Dishonored 2. I felt like the performance and what they were trying to do with the character, I felt like there was maybe a bit more nuance in, you're not seeing him in those same sequences that you do in the other Dishonored games where you like, go up to one of those shrines and then you get taken to the void and have a conversation with him there. Instead, you're like hearing his voice without seeing him. And maybe that's a part of it where part of Dishonored 2 I didn't like, is that he's moving around the scenery and all this stuff. and since he's like in your head, and he does pop up a couple times on the boat and stuff like that. But to me, there was something about the voice and the performance where he had like a tiredness to him. He felt kind of defeated and like ready to go in a lot of ways, and I thought that was cool. That kind of mirrored how Dowd is feeling in this game at the same time, and I'm sure there's some sort of connection like emotionally between those characters just because of the power and the void, and that they share some sort of intimate connection that's kind of unsaid in a way. So I liked him more this time around and the way he was used, and to me that felt like the correct ending. Even though I was a brutal killer the whole time, it still felt like the thing to do for some reason. But I think both the endings are fine. I think the story, once again, to me is more about like the journey. It's about like what you're doing in the individual levels. That's where like the best stories from Dishonored come from, rather than like the written, scripted sections of the game, right? That's kind of how it's more about like seeing the different ways you can interact with the world than it is like the individual story. But yeah, how about you, Dante? How did you feel like his fate was best determined?
Yeah, no, I did the same. I kind of I forgave him. Like I said, I think it also just mechanically was one of my favorites because you have to like decipher the mark.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's that little puzzle. Yeah.
I really enjoyed that one because it's like it segments the mark out into these like numbers, and it has like the decipher code. I don't know, it reminds me of like being a kid and getting like one of those things in your cereal where you have to like, decipher.
Sure.
I don't know. I thought it was really entertaining. And then just ultimately realizing like this whole time, the key to freeing him was just his name, and you've had his name on you since day one.
Yeah.
At least Billy
cool.
hasn't, but like for us as the player,
Yeah.
we have been aware of this symbol since day one, and it's just I don't know. I thought it was so cool and like really kind of tied some interesting pieces back together. It's like always been like maybe there's a little bit more mystery about not just who the outsider is, but what is this mark? Why is this so important? And like what like just what kind of power does this thing? Why does this thing hold power? And it's like, oh, okay, these things truly add up. It feels a little interesting that like Dowd still seems like he's struggling with your decision at the end, but is ultimately happy with it as well. I think it's a nice, really cathartic ending for Dowd also. And then just the fact that you realize that like the outsider, despite having this like omnipotence throughout his entire like life and has seen it all and seen everything through this kind of like dark kind of vision, I guess, and this kind of like almost conniving nature.
Right.
Now he's going to be powerless and go back into the world and just exist. I think is just like, it's not just him like dying, or it's not just him like, all right, you saved me, and now he's going to like go off into the ether. It's like, no, this man is going to live a full life now, and that's just like crazy to me. I think that's super interesting.
Which I feel like that would be an interesting story to hear in and of itself, because I almost get vibes of like Brooks and Shawshank Redemption, where he like finally gets out of prison after being in there his whole life, and he's like just isn't into it and kills himself. It's like I feel like maybe the outsider would do the same thing, where he's like, oh man, the world's a lot different than it used to be. There was not cars driving around when I was.
Yeah.
Luckily, it's unlike Brooks. He has seen it all at the same time. So
Yeah.
It must be so weird to go into the world and know everything.
Yeah. I wonder if like things look different, right? Just because like his eyes, legitimately, that might just change literally how he maybe he perceived the world in like a weird dark vision-y kind of way or something.
Yeah.
Colorblind for years, and
Saw color again. Yeah.
A single tear rolls down his eye.
He's got to see it from Jindosh's window. That nice like view of Karnaka. That's what he's got to go look at.
Seriously, best view.
I laughed so hard though when you like find out that his name is the Mark, because like I always have subtitles on for these games, and I was just like, I read that like very weird, as in like his name is Mark, it's not the Mark. So I'm like, really? I'm like, that's a weird decision. His actual name is just Mark. I don't think I like that at all. And then it hit me afterwards when I'm like, in that moment I was
Nice
worried
to meet you.
for a
My name is
second.
Mark Outsider. Yeah.
The outsider's real name is
not
Mark.
not one of Arkane's best names. No, it's no Fallon or Baplanix. That's
No
yeah.
way.
It's a bit
Oh my
weaker.
god, that got me.
I was really worried though for a second.
Oh my god, that's hilarious. Yeah, I guess the envisioned cultists being like the new enemy type in that level, I thought were really interesting and very terrifying, because they would just one-shot me kind of enemy, and I could figure out how to fight a couple of them, but like if there was ever multiple, it's like, yeah, right, they were pretty hard. So I don't think I fully figured out how to dispatch them. And the way like Clockwork Soldiers eventually figure out, okay, there's a few different tricks you can use to take these guys down pretty reliably. I did not figure that out in my first playthrough here of this. I'd be curious to try that out in Mission Plus and just see like what ways I could interact with them and whatnot. But they were a good, terrifying villain. And it was cool, like incentivized me to go back to a bit of stealth for the end of the game because I'd played so much high chaos. But it's like a nice way to wrap up once again that bow of Dishonored that you mentioned, Dante. Of like, I'm just gonna like do a little stealth sequence here and hide in the shadows again at the end of this thing because these guys are a bit too terrifying for me.
Another domino perk.
Oh, really? Can you domino like a random cultist?
Or the like minor versions that come out, like they create those like humanoid versions.
Right. Yeah. Those little rock ones. Yeah. That's pretty cool. I guess that's a good like almost sort of cheat code, I think, for original game plus. If you could do that in the first playthrough, it'd be like, oh, these guys are not that bad at all. But
otherwise, if those guys got up on me at all, it was over. Like,
even then, though, I feel like there's a lot of times when they're very much in their own spot. I guess it's because they'd create those little statues and you could use those. But otherwise, they are sometimes like inhabiting their own area. I also killed a lot of people, so maybe there was less cultists around just in general.
There's like a few. I know like right before you work your way down, you kind of work your way down off of a cliff near the end of that level. There's like a lab set up that's like got a ton of people there, and there's a guy who's pacing around them like constantly.
Gotcha.
There's like one or two there that are close enough.
I've very one random note on Death of the Outsider before we talk about the future of this thing, but one of the shopkeepers, the black market shopkeepers, because we talked about in Arcs and in Dark Messiah how those games came out very close to Elder Scrolls titles, and there was like some similarities or things where it's like, oh, those games kind of overshadowed it. We just noticed some similarities as Elder Scrolls fans over here, and like Skyrim came out pretty close to Dishonored 1, but I think that connection at that point ceased to exist. But one of like the iconic, just kind of played so much Oblivion in my life. One of the iconic things a shopkeeper will say is like, "Oh, you drive a hard bargain." Just like it's one of those like random lines that they'll spit out when you go talk to a shopkeeper. And the black market shopkeeper used that same line in Death of the Outsider. I'm like, I wonder if that's a reference or if it's just a generic shopkeeper line. But I thought that was a
same reason why no one can say what are you buying, what are you selling.
Sure, yeah. After Resident Evil, yeah. But yeah, you guys have anything else on Death of the Outsider before we get into? We'll talk about some of the future Dishonored sequence.
I really like just the old grizzled Dowd look that he had in this one. He very much seems like a man that's been through multiple lifetimes and it's just definitely has some regret in his life, but I just love like the white hair look that he had. Like he just looked like he was at the end of his days and just ready to rest, and he kind of felt that way after his DLC in the first game. But like this one, especially like being like kind of a tortured character when you first meet him, like he's just being forced to do these fights when his fighting days are just so done. He just really wants to move on, and I did like just the connection between Billy and him, and especially if you like if you sync up all the games, if you go the route where you didn't kill Billy at the in that DLC, it's like those two characters have really been through a lot, and obviously she like talks about that a lot at the beginning of this game, how like he kind of brought her in and taught her everything that she kind of knows, so very much like that father figure in her eyes, and to have him with you at the end of the game, it's kind of fun. But Dante, like you kind of brought up how like his, I don't even know, like hesitation for like you wanting to like either save the outsider, I thought was kind of weird. Like I feel like he's really would have been someone that's just accepted that by this point. Like it's not about revenge and killing him anymore. I get it. You need to have that dialogue to give the character or the player an option on what you want to do. But still, it just seemed like he would have been like, yeah, you made the right choice, Billy, when he's like, you can't ask me of this, Billy. Like, I can't do that. It's like, really? Like, okay. I feel like you out of everyone would have fully understood, especially just his interactions with the outsider. But it's kind of a minor thing. But still, I really like Dowd in this game. And I always knew he was in the game. I probably should have assumed because of the story elements and just tying Billy to him, but he was like in a screenshot too, like on Steam. So I was like, oh, old man Dowd, that's gonna be so cool to interact with in the game. So yeah, I'm really glad that he was back. And Dowd as a whole is definitely one of my favorite like antagonists or side characters, or I guess playable character that's kind of in video games.
Yeah, weirdly, Billy is like the only character who is in all three games, which is like, how did that happen?
That's weird. Yeah.
And Dowd has like some new dialogue in Dishonored 2, but like he's not actually seen in the game. Emily's name is mentioned here. I don't even think Corvo. There's like one reference I saw to Corvo, but it was like some minor little goofy. It felt like more of an Easter egg than an actual thing in the world. But it is kind of funny at the end of it that somehow she was the character that had screen time in all 3 games.
Yeah. An outsider, I guess.
Oh yeah. I guess good point.
Different
Good
voice
point.
actor though, so it might get split up there.
Yeah, speaking of this is my last piece too. Speaking of just like new looks for people, Billy's like design in this is incredible. I love this kind of like weird void arm, and her eye in this are just like one of the sickest designs I think out of all the characters in these games for me. I the moment she gets that arm, it's just like so effective, and it just the way that thing moves around, and I don't know, I just really dig that thing. Just seems really cool. I do feel like maybe like as much as I love Rosario Dawson and like thought she did an excellent job in 2, I felt like her performance was a little just okay in this one, and I think it might be more because she's not having to have conversations with people that much. A lot of times it's her like internalizing dialogue, stuff like that. It's you're hearing what she's thinking and less so, or she's just talking to herself.
Yeah.
But it came off at times a tad bit awkward when she was doing that. But when she was having conversations with people, I thought wasn't the case. So
I agree, though. In the beginning, it was very noticeable because all the dialogue is just her talking to herself and like kind of tutorializing the character on like what you're doing, but you're just talking to yourself. And I think it was just weird because that's never happened in any of their games before. Like, although the characters do talk to themselves sometimes, you know, like as Emily, like you're like you're there for a couple minutes and then you're just talking to Megan or Corvo or whoever. So you always have someone to kind of bounce off of. But I agree, that was definitely noticeable for me in the beginning of it. I'm glad we were able to, you know, meet Dowd and a couple other characters that she does bounce off of. But it is very noticeable in the beginning.
Yeah, that's like we talked about that in Dishonored 1 and 2, that both those games had a ton of big star power included in them. Even Dishonored 1, weirdly, right, had, you know, some of these bigger names in it at the time, even though they were a smaller studio. And this game, I mean, still has Michael Madsen and Rosario Dawson, who are big, but there's no one new, no new Hollywood actors thrown in there. I'm sure a big part of that is just a budgetary thing of this being maybe starting as a DLC, a smaller thing, and that's an expensive thing to do. But also, Dishonored 2, that did not necessarily lead to higher sales. I mean, it's always hard to say what exactly factors led into what and why people bought a game and whatnot. But I'm sure that they saw that, okay, we got all these big names in here, and it didn't really, you know, give us the first game had big names too, so it's hard to compare the two in that way. But yeah, I guess there's just so few new characters and like companion characters, and obviously there's a new playable character, but it's not a new character, if that makes sense. So yeah, I guess they didn't feel the need to get in any new actors. I'm glad they got to keep everyone from, you know, they still had Michael Madsen, which obviously is a big deal, you know, all these years later to get him back there. Rosario Dawson, you needed her for sure. And then the outsider, it's the same voice from Dishonored 2, of course. And I think by this time I'm like more used to it, but also, like I said, I like the just performance more in general. And then everyone else does good in the game for the voice performances, but there isn't like a character that stands out. You know, when we're getting to our rankings and we're ranking best characters, I don't think there's going to be a new person in this game that isn't, you know, Dowd or Billy or the outsider, right? It's just kind of those three and then some side characters for me.
You're not nominating the rat voice?
It's a pretty good voice. I was looking at, I'm going to look it up real quick, but like that actress who did the voices, like, what other characters did she do? Let me get this real quick because it was a funny thing when I was looking it up. Emily O'Brien is her name. She was in an episode of Love, Death, Robots. She did a Gamora in a Guardians of the Galaxy like video game. She's in Death Stranding as Amelie and Bridget, like Amelie in that game. Yeah, she does that voice. That's pretty cool.
That is cool.
Yeah, she like obviously most of these a lot of voice actresses have.
She's Scarlet Witch, Midnight Suns.
Oh, I didn't even notice that. That's super fun. I love that.
She's in Speaking God of War, like she's got
Gotham Knights, Saints Row. She was in the Sea Beast. Kirkland, I know you like that movie from last year. So
it's stacked.
Dylan, you mentioned Death Stranding, and right when you get into the void and you just have like that one elephant just like flying, I'm like, man, I'm in Death Stranding right now.
Yeah.
I'm on the beach.
Giant black gooey beasts.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. So, dude, she had a voice in Morrowind? All right. Okay,
No,
that's
what
cool.
I'm saying. Like, she has a wildly.
Oh, the Elder Scrolls Online Morrowind, not the real Morrowind, fake Morrowind, but
yeah, it seems
fake
like
Morrowind.
she started doing stuff back in like 2006, so she's been around the block.
Right on.
she does some League of Legends voices. Kirkland, Camille, Samira. Do you know those characters?
There you go.
There you go.
Camille's very similar to the Dishonored aesthetic, so there you go.
Gotcha.
It's very fitting.
Iconic voice actress there, Emily O'Brien. Let's take our last break, and we'll be right back. Okay, we are back. So in our Dishonored 2 episode, we did have a little discussion on what the future of this series could be, but I want to do a little bit more of that because we're closing off the Dishonored chapter here. We know that Arkane, of course, Arkane Austin is releasing Redfall here. We don't really know what Arkane Lyon is working on next, but after Dishonored, they went and made Deathloop. So yeah, I mean, we have the 3 Dishonored games. Throw the DLC in there. We talked about the books that exist kind of in between those games. Of course, the great Dishonored Rat Assassin, the iOS game where you're fruit ninjaing some rats and all that. And then of course Deathloop does take place in this same world in a obvious, not so obvious way, but like probably 100 years later. I think we talked about this, but I already forget what we decided on, how many years ago or past it was. But yeah, talking about the future of Dishonored, I mean, we've talked about this too with Arkane and Dark Messiah, or not Arkane, Arcs and Dark Messiah, is in terms of like a remake or remaster territory. And we talked about in Dishonored 1, I was like, yeah, I'm feeling the age on this now, and like another remaster or remake, like it would be a noticeable thing, but I still don't think we're nearly, we're not far enough from that game yet. It's not time to do anything like that. They did, I don't know when the definitive edition released, probably like a couple years after the game originally came out. And like we're not due for a remake yet. And if they do want to do that, I hope Arkane doesn't do it. I don't want them quote unquote wasting time to make that remaster.
Mm-hmm.
I'd want like maybe some other Microsoft studio could take that on as like a smaller task or something like that. I think maybe the one thing for me would be like these games would be pretty cool. Like even though I love mouse and keyboard, it would be cool to have these games on Switch. At least the original Dishonored I think could definitely run on Switch. The other ones might need to be like cloud versions or something. Yeah, maybe. And like because Arkane is now part of Microsoft, I don't think that's going to happen, but it would be kind of interesting. The Steam Deck now exists so you can play the games portably that way, but that would be a thing. But in terms of like that, like are we all kind of the same page that like it's too soon for any of these previous games to need to come back in a big way? Obviously Dishonored 2 and Death the Outsider still feel like modern games, right?
One would be the only one that I think would even be remotely necessary, and it still doesn't feel like super. It feels like it just needs like a bit of a. It feels like it just needs a good mod. It doesn't feel like it needs a whole remake yet or remaster yet.
I think a better like wait 10 years and do a remake where you actually like throw some new features in there. Like obviously locking runes would be a great one. Locking bone charms and things like that with the heart would be a cool little addition. But like then when you could actually maybe work on some levels a bit more, maybe you could, because of tech, take away some loading zones and make them like bigger areas. Maybe you could add some new stuff. Maybe, but like I don't even know if we ever really need to do that. I think that's a game that like perfectly exists as it is. But at some point, a remaster of it would be nice. Just get some updated graphics and maybe load times and things like that. But even that's like, give me at least another decade before we do that. Don't need it here.
It's funny, you guys on the first retro, you guys were showing how like, just comparing it to like the second game, it's definitely showing some oldisms, for lack of a better term. And after playing these ones now, I'm like almost nervous to go back to Dishonored 1. I'm like, oh no, I'm finally going to be seeing my child in a different light.
Yeah, it just needs a fresh coat of paint. I think the gameplay is still great there. Obviously, like some of the quality of life stuff from 2, I would like to see go back to 1. But
the mana potions again, take that out.
Yeah. Like, but ultimately, I don't think it's like in dire need. I know earlier in that first one, we were also talking about like, oh, it'd be cool to see like this story about this side character, and I feel like that's the only way I would see a necessity for a remake of Dishonored 1 is like if it was coming in line with something that was like maybe a side story that was maybe its own like fleshed out thing, but say we go back and we see like how Granny Rags' life was and you play through her life, like, you know what I mean? And like they position that as its own Dishonored. I think it would be really great to see like an HD remake of Dishonored 1. That way you have that attachment to that character. You don't have to necessarily slog through a game that's like maybe a tiny bit showing its age. But other than like that reasoning, which I think is when most developers decide to remaster games or remake games, is because they got something else in the works that they want you to get like hyped up for. That'd be the only way I think I would see it as being like a necessity. And honestly, the only way I can see them continuing down the Dishonored road, like they'd have to. I don't know if there's a lot of new doors to open up. Actually, like I think when we were playing through the first one, I didn't realize how kind of neatly this ended.
Yeah. I guess one thing we can talk about here is like, okay, well, like Deathloop once again, in a way, is a continuation of that universe. Whether or not you feel like that's a Dishonored sequel, I don't really feel like it's a Dishonored sequel, although it exists in the same world. But maybe there's some way that they could make a greater connection there, or they like merge the two. I don't know how you market that. This is Dishonored subtitled Deathloop. Like that gets a bit messy at that point. So I don't think they would go down a path like that. But there has been some rumors that it seems like potentially Arkane Leon's next game is a Deathloop follow-up, and I'm really curious what that looks like, because are they taking like that same general ethos of like, here's these levels, you're playing through them multiple times, you're figuring out like a mystery and stuff, like how story-wise I don't even know how they would frame that, of like getting you into a new death loop that you're completing. Like I don't understand how they would do that, but I think some of those ideas I would love to see done again. Like particularly I think a great way to do a Deathloop sequel would be to take away the quote-unquote golden loop and instead have like 5 or 6 different ways that you can kill all the visionaries in a day. Obviously they would change maybe the setup of it, but I think that could be a really cool thing. That would probably be a very big design challenge and maybe a reason why they didn't do it in that original game. But I think that would be a good way to make a sequel of Deathloop, and maybe there's a way that they could incorporate more Dishonored stuff into it. Now that because that was really a big reveal at the end of the game, is here's the pistol. This is part of the Dishonored universe. There's like some hints along the way, but for the most part, it felt pretty disconnected until the end, and they're like making it pretty overt that it is a connection there. So maybe now that that's a thing that's out in the open, they could go more down that route with a Deathloop sequel. But I think in terms of Dishonored, for me, I don't really like Granny Regs. That would be interesting. I don't want them to go backwards at all, though. I think the only way I would be really if they announced any Dishonored thing, I'm biased enough that I would be excited for it. But I think really for me, I want to see something progress into the future, whether it's like maybe you go another 15, 20, 30 years in the future, and maybe you still play as Emily, and there's like some other journey where maybe she has to go to one of the other provinces, like Gristle, Tivia, Morley. I think there's other places on the map that I'll bring up a map. We can look at that real quick and just see. But like maybe something that could be interesting. Maybe Corvo has passed away at that point, and it's maybe a future there. But like even then, like I don't know, I'd maybe just want a new character, a new thing. And we saw too, like the way Deathloop sets up powers is that it's like, okay, this is still powers in the same way they exist in Dishonored. There's like Blink and Domino, sometimes 1-to-1, the exact same powers, but those were created via science instead of this mythical, magical sense that it is in Dishonored. Obviously, with the death of the Outsider and the removal of the Void and stuff like that, you would not have powers in the same way if it is a sequel that is furthering from here and not going back in time. So I think there's other ways that you could have powers, and it doesn't have to be science. You could come up with something else. But I think there's still ways you could get those powers and movesets and some of those things that make it still feel like Dishonored, but it could be quite a departure from what these first 3 games are.
That could be a really just like interesting concept in general. It's like bridging the gap between the two. Like these are technically in the same universe, but like, okay, how did we get here? Like, how did we get to the point where like were they still so aware of the Outsider and the powers that came from the Outsider that they started to try and recreate these things now that the Outsider's influence is gone? Like maybe we see like the early periods of this science coming to place, and we learn that like maybe the Outsider's influence was the reason that this concept is even beginning to exist. And then we see how it kind of far it goes into this like classist nightmare that is Deathloop, where it's just like only the rich have these things, and they're just like these well, I guess they do go into the science of those things a lot as well during Deathloop. So I don't know. It's tough. It's tough to find I guess a route forward for Dishonored for me.
Yeah, it's tough for me to picture Dishonored title without the powers, but I feel like the powers it's really not that difficult when you compare it to like the Deathloop route, where it was just based on science, and I could definitely picture that title of taking place I don't know, 20, 30, 50 years after the events of Dishonored or like Death of the Outsider. Just people, because like even though he's gone, I feel like people still know about the Outsider and that influence and know about these powers. So give it some time. I'm sure people have just figured out a way to kind of harness something at least equivalent. It like definitely thinking of like the Deathloop powers, how some of them are basically identical, but that's also like much earlier or later on in the future. So maybe you got like the prototype version of that power. Maybe it's almost like a suit or something, like a mod that you have to wear to like actually access these powers. And just seeing how that influence of a power like that could be shifting the overall like landscape of the Isles. I think that's a really, really cool aspect. And I kind of hope it goes that route, because I don't want to be done with this universe, even though you can make the comparisons to Deathloop, and I do agree that they are tied, but just because they're tied doesn't mean I'm going to be seeing Dunwall again, right, or Karnaca. And I really want to see these locations, possibly with a little bit of a futuristic spin on them. They've always kind of had that with the Sokolov technology, Jindosh as well, but just like give it 50 years and some like crazy inspiration on tech. I think that could be really fun. And I would want to see a new character if we got that. I definitely would want to still feel like the effect of like what the Empress has kind of done. Like I don't want to not hear the name Caldwell or no Caldwin. Caldwin. Yeah, there you go. I definitely want to hear that and just know that I am in that same universe, even though if she's like an old lady Empress now and we just got like a new character. I think that could be really fun, especially just updated graphics and everything. I mean, Dishonored 2 and Death of the Outsider still feels pretty modern. I mean, I can't run it on Ultra on my device, so just picturing like what they could be doing with more modern system. And I mean, yeah, like just seeing what they've done with Deathloop, I completely trust that they can really still kill it with these systems and innovate upon them. But that also doesn't mean I don't want to get just a Dishonored type title and not more Deathloop, because I really love that idea as well. I think if you ask me if I want like a brand new title or continuation on either Deathloop or Dishonored, I feel like that's a hard answer, because I do want to keep seeing that, but I also want to see where they innovate and just get creative on a brand new title, kind of like with Redfalls it's gonna be. So
we're getting it, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I don't want to say no. I don't want to say I'm done with this, but if at the end of the day this is like the trilogy, I think it's a pretty damn good trilogy.
Wait, taking out the element, if it's not an either or, do you guys want to see a sequel to Deathloop, or do you want them to like move on to some new idea? Just in general, not in the let's not from the perspective of like Deathloop exists and then therefore you're not getting Dishonored. Just like in general, or do you want Arkane Leon to do something new after this?
I think the ending of Deathloop left it like a little bit unclear on like what happened. So I do want to see that for sure.
Sure.
It's not an easy answer. Maybe I'll lean on that route.
Yeah.
I do want to see a sequel to Deathloop.
I don't know if I even want to see. I love Deathloop. Like we're gonna get into rankings. I won't spoil where Deathloop sits, but man, I really loved that game. And I kind of like how obtuse the end is. I think it leaves. I don't need, and I know Dishonored did this, but I don't think I need every single story to have this like I know every single nook and cranny of how things happened, and I know how my like protagonists are gonna have their fairy tale ending. I kind of like that looseness that that Deathloop had, and the no pun intended, the loop of Deathloop is so good and specific that I feel like if they were to go back to Deathloop as a concept, I would want them to do something completely different with the world they have built and not necessarily go back to that style of video game again.
There's also so many ways they could take that, where it could be you take Colt and he goes off and does an adventure and like that's the sequel, or it could be here's another loop that exists in some way, they create it in a story way that makes sense, and it's just like a new character, a new situation, but it's like here's the mechanics of Deathloop and here's a sequel to that, but it's not necessarily a sequel to Colt and Juliana's story and what's going on there with the Visionaries. So even that is like pretty diverse. But I also look at their trajectory, and since Dishonored, they split off, and like Prey existed, and then Deathloop, and then now Redfall. I even look at like the types of tools and combat, and I feel like Arkane has gone very much to a thing of like, here we want like more intense weapons, automatic weapons, things that like all these different types of guns, whereas Dishonored has like kind of a rinky-dink pistol that feels really good, but it's not an automatic gun by any means. Then you have a crossbow. So I feel like even just in the tech-wise things, I feel like they want that evolution in a way. And so even if we get Dishonored and it's 50 years later or something like that, I feel like that's what the route they would go, so that there can be more tech and they can just have more like automatic guns. I know that sounds like kind of like a basic thing, but we're talking about like how the powers would be, how they'd want to bring those back in a way, at least Blink at the very least, probably dark vision in some sort. But I feel like they would also want to do that with weapons and how they've gone forward with their 3 other IPs since Dishonored has been created. So I feel like that would definitely be a thing. I also think too, like Dishonored 2 and Dishonored at the Outsider, not the biggest financial successes, but I think now, since those games came out, have been acquired by Microsoft and Game Pass exists, and I feel like that also opens up the doors in a lot of way of like maybe Bethesda's like, oh, you know what, guys, maybe don't do Dishonored right now, maybe put that on the shelf and let's create some new IP. But like maybe for Xbox and the Game Pass machine that exists now, maybe it's like better incentive for them to do Dishonored, and if the game doesn't sell as many copies, it could still be a huge success for them. And that would be maybe a big reason to get people onto Game Pass instead of something like Redfall. It's a new IP and they have to explain it to people, and some people might be turned off by it, but it's like, well, Dishonored has a fan base, and even if the sequels didn't do as well financially, it's still like maybe that's another reason they would want to go back to that well, just strictly from like a business perspective on why they'd want to do that.
I think they need their mega hit, right? And maybe that's their path forward. Once they have this thing that is this like huge financial success, those are the ones that we start seeing another like 2 or 3. We start seeing a trilogy from an Arkane studio again, and not so much them going back to the well, because I don't think they've gotten it yet. Still, like sad as it is to say, like they deserve it.
Yeah.
Like surely they deserve it, but
this will be a big moment. Redfall being a
to back them up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Well, like Microsoft throw money at infinite money and stuff now.
Yeah. I mean, this will be a big moment for them. Is Redfall being a day one Game Pass title? How is that going to do for them financially? It's a much different situation, and they don't have to sell as many copies for it to be as big of a success. But are people buying that like bite back upgrade that costs like $30 if you're playing on Game Pass because you want to get new stuff and get those new characters when that comes out? And like how many players are they getting? Is that a good number and stuff like that? So obviously the metrics will be a bit different, but I hope it is a big success for them, and I hope people talk about it for 12 days until Breath of the Wild comes out or Tears of the Kingdom, and then people will be moving on.
What is going on with their timing, man?
Thankfully, they're before Tears of the Kingdom, so hopefully that's the thing. But even like Dead Island and Star Wars Jedi Survivor come out like days before it, so the release date I don't think is amazing. I'm gonna be jumping in there and excited, but
right, we'll have to
it changes everything for sure.
Totally.
None of those other 3 games I just mentioned are on Game Pass, so they're gonna be a big hit on there.
Question about Redfall. I know maybe we're gonna talk about Redfall plenty as we go forward, but how do you guys feel about the promotion of Redfall so far? Because like so far, I don't feel like I've seen. I feel like it took me a very long time to even recognize what that game is supposed to be.
They've had trouble explaining it, where it seemed like a Left 4 Dead like.
The same thing too. They had a really hard time.
Yeah, Deathloop was a very hard time for them to explain, and Redfall's been the same thing where people have assumed, and I still even now to this day see people be like, oh yeah, it's kind of like Left 4 Dead, when it's like no, this is like an open world.
It's supposed to be more like a Far Cry.
Yeah, it's more of like an open world situation where single player or multiplayer, whether it's co-op, single player co-op, you're gonna get like a fully developed experience and all that stuff. And yeah, it's different. It's something new for them, and I feel like the marketing has been. I mean, I'm obviously an outlier because I will eat up any trailer they put out because I'm so curious. And even now, I'm at a point where I'm like, I've seen too much, and I want to like step back. And there's a couple trailers or like character reveals, or I'm like, I don't even want to see this stuff anymore. I'm good at this point. Unless I got to talk about it on the podcast, I'm gonna just put it on the back burner because I've seen enough at this point. But I think a lot of people haven't. I think maybe a good thing is that a couple of weeks ago, at the time of recording, a bunch of content creators and stuff got to play the game for a few hours, and impressions for that were like overwhelmingly great. People really enjoyed the game, And all those people were playing single player too. That's the setup they had for it. And I think that's a good thing for them, is that a lot of people have been like, well, is this game designed for co-op? Like, am I going to enjoy it single player? And every one of those content creators that got to play the game played it single player. And for everything I heard was like positive. Yeah, there's going to be some people who have some hangups, or some people thinking like maybe some of the movesets are a bit minimized when you factor in that the movesets are split among 4 characters instead of one intense character like you get in a Dishonored game or something. So obviously it's not all like universally praised, but I feel like that was maybe a good thing for it. But even then, I don't know if those impressions just made people fall in love with the idea and like made the general population interested in it in the same way that people like us are, who are, you know, big Arkane heads at this point.
Yeah, I'm like ready to start seeing like banner ads for it on every webpage and stuff like that. I guess my only worry for it is like maybe this one's gonna slide under the radar a little bit.
Yeah.
And the way
I've seen
you will hear about it is like the same way with Deathloop. Like it'll be this kind of like last minute push, and most of the marketing is gonna come from people just like raving about it.
Well, I mean, Game Pass is a great way to market a game.
Yeah,
when you
that's true.
pop up and you see what's new on Game Pass and Redfalls right there, and people are like, oh, I want to download this and check it out. Like that alone is a huge marketing thing that you can't really see until the game is. I guess it probably is up for pre-loading at this point, but like the day one when it drops, like that's gonna get people talking.
Not saying this from a perspective of like, man, they're not doing a good job. Just in a, like a hopeful, like, man, I really want them to have their smash hit.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of games that do have this kind of just huge like day one, like just these sales, like marquee sales. They I feel like I hear about those games for like 6 months nonstop.
Yeah, I don't think Redfall is going to be that, but hopefully it can get somewhere close.
In the last couple of months, I feel like I've started to see like the ads on Instagram or YouTube or something like that for it. It's like, okay, nice. They're getting the word out there. Hopefully I'm not the only one seeing this, because the algorithms or whatnot.
Right.
All we're
Yeah,
talking about is
that's
Arkane. That's the
thing
only
too,
ad I'm
like-
getting is Arkane games.
Yeah. Yeah, the algorithm's like, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? He's talking about this thing a lot. I'm going to bring up this map. This is like the map of Dishonored. So looking at, like, this is where Dunwall is down here. You cruise down to the south, and this is where Karnaca is, way down here at the bottom of Serkonos here. So obviously, just looking at this map, like, there's a lot they could, like, Gristle is a huge area, Morley. I think Tivia is, like, largely Antarctica sort of vibe, like a lot of snow and whatnot, which could still be interesting.
Yeah.
And there's, like, this whole, I don't even know what's going on with the Pandesian continent over here, but just looking at the map alone, like, I feel like they've set up a lot of, like, places they could go. And, like, yeah, if you're going from Karnaca over here, which is like, this is like a blown up map, like Karnaca's this tiny little thing, like that is a huge area that there could be all sorts of weird science and magic and things going on there, and maybe they just haven't even crossed these seas yet, because I don't even feel like this area is talked about a lot in the games, whereas all these other continents close to Dunwall and stuff are talked about. You see those names come up all the time, just in, you know, item descriptions and notes and stuff like that.
Definitely makes
I think
you
the only
wonder
time I've
why-
heard Pandesian is like the Pandesian plague, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, why
Okay.
create such a in comparison to the Isles, this huge continent?
Yeah.
Why even create it unless you intend to utilize this space
Mm-hmm.
in some capacity? Maybe this is where Deathloop is happening. That's not.
Well, Deathloop's like a small island too,
Little
Black
island.
Reef, right?
Yeah,
Which
it's a little island.
unclear. I don't think it's ever stated in that game. You never see a world map, so I don't think we know where Black Reef is. Maybe some of the super fans do, but I certainly don't know where Black Reef would be in comparison to how close it is to
Cereal on
Dunwall
there,
and
I
stuff like
couldn't
that.
find it.
Yeah, I'm looking around, but I don't see. If it was mentioned back in like Dishonored 1 or something, that would be crazy. It's like Black Reef Isle, something like that. But I feel like it's pretty far away. Is the vibe I get for sure.
I see.
Anything else on just like the future of Dishonored? I mean, I would love to see it, and I think it will happen, but I still think we're pretty far away. I think it like could be at least another decade before we see something. I think it, like Arkane Leon, whether it's Deathloop or not, maybe even they do another game and then get to Dishonored again is the way I could see it. I don't. This could be a whole nother discussion on its own, but I also think now that Arkane is part of Microsoft, like I would actually be down for specific and maybe a couple studios to use that IP and do something interesting with it. Like, I mean, Obsidian, give them like that IP, and maybe it's not a first-person action game. Maybe it's like a
Dishonored RPG.
Yeah, like I would be down
Whoa.
to see something like that. So that could be a long discussion of like which Microsoft studios would we want to make a spin-off thing, but I would be open to that as well. But obviously this is the Arkane retrospective and sticking on that thing. I think we will see it again. I just think it'll be a while, and I'm totally okay with that because I love the vibe that they're creating with Prey, with Deathloop. And I still think I have to fall in love with Redfall's vibe. I'm getting more and more there with this marketing. But I at least like what I'm seeing, and I'm very excited to play the game. So I am happy with them making some new IP, whether we get Deathloop sequel or not. We're, existing in that Dishonored world. But yeah, I think Dishonored 3 will come at some point. I think they'll just call it that probably. Or maybe they'd have a subtitle, but I think Dishonored 3 might be.
Happening. Especially
No?
for like 10 years. Like that would make it like so
But isn't that like a big pop though? Like, damn, Dishonored 3? That's crazy.
I just feel like they have to, like, when that happens, it's usually like there's a huge fan base for those already, right? It's like, oh, now all these people are like, oh shit, I gotta play 1 and 2 now.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Right? They feel intimidated by going back. So I feel like if they were gonna bring Dishonored back, it's just gonna be called Dishonored, right?
Wow, the same
Dishonored
name, eh? The God of War
2033
approach,
or something like that.
Maybe, yeah, it's possible.
We'll see when we get there. Well, it'll be fun to debate in the meantime.
I mean, I would love if it was just. I would, for the cheesiness of it, I would love if it was just called Dishonored Deathloop, and it was just like
Dishonored
merged in one title.
Yeah.
It would be goofy, but like, man, I'd be down. I'd be so down for that.
Subtitle is The Outsider's Back.
Yeah.
Mad.
Yeah, the death of Corvo Atano. Like that's just what it's called.
Corvo
Oh,
is the new outsider.
Oh man, that
Oh.
would be. Yeah, there's a new Void, the Void 2.
Void 2 engine.
Oh god. Well,
there's all kinds of ways now. Like the more
So
I
many
think
ways.
about it,
Yeah.
it's fun to think about because we could go a million different directions, and all of them will be good because it will be made by potentially Arkane or at least a side studio they trust.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else on Dishonored before we move on? Next time we're talking about Prey, and then we're into Redfall. But anything else on just Dishonored, Death of the Outsider, whether it's this future talk, and anything else? Any final points?
These are really good video games, and you should probably play them.
Yeah,
They're good games, yes.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, we didn't, I guess, explicitly mention that, but like Death of the Outsider being a spin-off, yes, it is a sequel to 2, but like, I feel like this is a good one that, in the future, Dante, like, not just because of the Burnout thing, like, I'll just boot this game up at some point, whereas I still feel like if I want to go through Dishonored games, it's nice to do it, like, in a row, but I feel like this is a good one to really just, for that spin-off nature of it, just put on, if you want a shorter experience, you want, like, a quicker game, this is a good way to do it, and there's still obviously a lot for all of us to do in multiple playthroughs of this thing.
Totally.
Well, there you go. We've closed out the Dishonored trilogy of episodes here. Very excited to be talking about Prey because that's another great game as well. And then, right into Redfall. And then those rankings are going to be a good spicy time too when we do that a couple months from now. So thank you everyone for listening, for joining us on this Dishonored adventure. And we'll see you again. Well, I guess next week-ish for Deathloop. And then we'll be back in a couple more weeks from that to talk about Prey. So thank you for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Bye.